Order, order. This is the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, and this is our hearing into racism in Yorkshire cricket. Now, our first witness panel today, we're joined by Mr. Azeem Rafiq, who is obviously a former Yorkshire player and wishes to talk to us about his experiences at Yorkshire County Cricket Club. Thank you for joining us, Azeem. Just for some housekeeping, first of all, just to state that we've invited many of the witnesses who have been mentioned in press reports and also will be undoubtedly mentioned during the course of this session. We've had widespread refusals in terms of witnesses. However, there are some who may be mentioned who we have not invited, but have given no indication they would like to be invited. But what we would say to them is very simple. If they find that there is anything they wish to answer as a result of any statement made in this session, they could certainly in the first instance write to the committee, and that will obviously form part of our evidence as we move forward to a report stage. I'd also remind everyone in the public gallery that there is quiet during proceedings as we ask and questions. Declaration of interest. First of all, Damien Green.
I'm a member of the MCC and Surrey County Cricket Club.
As chair, I declare that I'm the chair of Lords and Commons Cricket Club. Also, I attended events as part of the events research programme with the ECB and with Surrey County Cricket Club. Anyone else? Good morning, Mr. Rafiq. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning.
Please just tell us in your own words why you think or what you think went wrong at Yorkshire County Cricket Club for you.
First of all, thanks for giving me this opportunity to talk about my story and what I went through over a long period of time at the club. Look, I was a young kid from Pakistan, living in Barnsley, with a dream to represent England. Pretty early on at the club, I joined a dressing room full of my heroes: Michael Vaughan, Matthew Hoggard, part of the 2005 Ashes team, and it was just the most surreal moment for me. I entered that dressing room. Pretty early on, me and other people from Asian background, there was comments such as, "You lot sit over there near the toilets," elephant washers, the word "packy" was used constantly, and there just seems to be an acceptance in the institution from the leaders, and no one ever stamped it out. To be honest, all I wanted to do is play cricket and play cricket for England and live my dream and live my family's dream. In my first spell, I don't really think I quite realised for what it was. I think I was in denial. I looked the other way, just like everyone else did, because really, for me, playing cricket was the most important thing. Towards the end of my first spell, but constantly throughout it, I knew there was something wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what was wrong. I started taking medication for my mental health, and it was tough, really tough. I left the club in 2014. I tried, instead of looking at them things, I went away and tried to work on myself, my game, and my mental health. I felt like I did that, and then I got an opportunity through my performances, being above and beyond everyone else, to get back at the club, and because they struggled to replace me, quite frankly. Adil Rashid had gone to play for England, and they couldn't replace me. The first few months I came back, I thought, you know what, things have changed here. It's a little bit different. Alex Lees was a captain, who was a friend, and he's a good person. And I know he had personal tragedy of himself at a young age, so he understood me. We had Jason Gillespie, who's an Australian cricketer and coach, who I felt supported by. Jason left at the end of 2016, and it just felt, wow, the temperature in the room had just been turned up. You got Andrew Gale coming in as coach, and Gary Balance as captain. And these guys, for me, they were in Yorkshire through and through, and they, as they call it, the White Rose values were embedded in them. For the first time, I started to see for what it was. Felt isolated, humiliated at times, constant use of the word "packy." In 2017 pre-season tour, we were in a place, and Gary Balance walks over and goes, "Why are you talking to him? You know he's a packy," or "He's not a sheikh, he's got no oil." And this happened in front of teammates, it happened in front of coaching staff. We were on a bus trip in London to Surrey game, and we went past a couple of men with beard, and it was like, oh, is that your dad? If we go past a corner shop, or does your uncle own this? And this happened in front of, again, Martin Moxon, Andrew Gale, club officials, and it would never got stamped out. Everyone saw it. But because the institution and the environment, it becomes such a norm in there that I don't think anyone thought there was anything wrong with it. And that's probably why some people don't even remember it. End of 2017, we had a really difficult pregnancy. And through that time, the treatment that I received from some of the club officials was inhuman. They weren't really bothered about the fact that I was at training one day and I get a phone call to say there's no heartbeat. Sorry.
Your time, Mr. Rafiq. You wish to break it any moment, please just let me know. There's no hard deadlines today. I mean, I was quite interested by your comment there. I'll probably return more specifics. You said about Mr. Balance. Now, he made great store in his statement where he issued an apology over the fact that you were friends. I think he mentioned as well in the report that you went to have dinner with his family in Harare, I think. And he suggested basically it was sort of a banter angle to the use of the P word. Now, in your second spell at Yorkshire, were you and Mr. Balance friends? And if not, did he use the P word during your second spell?
Yes, 2017 pre-season tour. And throughout, really. It's interesting, and I want to address Gary's statement, because there was a narrative there that we were the best of mates, we had a really good relationship. When Gary came to the club from Derby, I saw in him what I saw in myself, and that was outsiders. A lot of the players at the time called Gary a lot of things, which were completely out of order. But again, it was such a norm that no one said anything. Mine and Gary's relationship started to deteriorate around 2013 due to Gary's conduct. It's not, I mean, at one point, his behaviour around his personal relationships was so disgusting that I raised it with an agent that we shared and said this needs to be sorted out before it gets quite silly. And then even after that, we were amicable, we were teammates, but we never shared the same relationship. 2017 onwards, initially when Gary took over as captain, he found it a real struggle. Steve Patterson, a senior player, got left out pretty early on, and he got the whole dressing room fighting. It was toxic in a lot of ways. I tried to help Gary and the team, but in the end, it became evident that even though Steve had caused a lot of issues, that I was going to be the one that got picked on. 6 or 7 players made a complaint about Tim Breslin that year, but I was the only one that got the repercussions of that, and I was the only person of colour.
There was sorry to cross you, Mr. Rafiq, but there was my reading of your witness statement, also the report more generally, which is quite a difficult read due to the way it's constructed, but my reading of it is that effectively the attitude of Yorkshire changed almost like a light switch going off the moment you made a complaint about racial harassment. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, I first raised it as bullying in 2017. I've seen board minutes now a month before, and it calls me as the leader, potential captain, driver on the field, someone that potentially we should build a team around, especially in white ball cricket. I raised that complaint about Tim Breslin, and Tim, former England cricketer, also related to the coach. I knew there was potentially going to be real trouble, but I thought, I mean, everyone complained, so it will be the same for everyone. But on the flip side of it, the board minutes say I'm a problem, a troublemaker, and an issue that needs to be resolved. And I feel that then blinded them into how they treated me through the pregnancy and the loss of my son. My first day back after losing my son, Martin Moxon literally got me in a room and ripped the shreds off me. I've never seen him speak to anyone like that through my time at the club. And I couldn't believe it. And really, me raising the complaints that I did at the time internally, reporting mechanisms, I raised it with the National Asian Cricket Council, I raised it with the PCA, with my PDM, who I thought, Personal Development Manager,
Okay.
who I thought was on my side until I read the internal emails. I raised it with the Inclusivity and Diversity board member. I went to his house, Hanif Malik, and literally cried my eyes out. And he said to me that he's going to deal with this and he doesn't need the job. 4 days later, I got a message from him that he's going to let Mark Arthur know that I've been, just to be transparent. The subject data access request actually showed that the minute I left his house, he rang Mark and informed him of everything before the meeting I had with Mark the next day.
Now, in terms of the handling of your complaint, I mean, obviously, there's huge issues there in terms of the internal handling, the fact that your identity was revealed to the individual you were complaining about, presumably, which is against practice. But also, what are your views about the report and the way in which it's structured? Because I understand it was a law firm who Mr. Hutton, I believe, used to work for, conducted the inquiry, and then the panel, which oversaw that inquiry, effectively some members of those had to step down, and 3 members were left. And reading the report, it's a bit of sort of a Venn diagram of stupidity, actually, in the way in which it's structured, because you've got sort of like moments in which hearsay is effectively given. For example, Zimba is presumed to be racist, while the P word is not. That's an example of the sort of thinking that goes on in this report, and the way in which it also tends to have the panel contradicting the law firm and vice versa. What are your views about how that was handled, and basically, what did you think when you first sort of clapped eyes on it?
I mean, I only got it a week ago.
Yeah.
Seems like some people that had been accused, upheld stuff against, got my stuff before I even got it, and they used the platform at the Daily Telegraph to show the world that. From the offset, what I wanted to do is try and talk about the institution, try and talk about what I went through, and try and present my evidence in a way that it can be seen as, look, there's things that are not right and we can really all learn from it, and what's happened to me has happened. It'll never change. But my aim was to try and see if my experience can help others. Clearly, the word institutional is something no one wants to be institutional racism is something no one wants to be associated with. And I mean, the lawyers, Squire Patton Boggs, having connection with Roger from the offset, set Sean of Bad Road, they were brilliant, they were lovely at the start, so respectful, wanted to hear everything I had to say. The panel led by a surgeon. Again, as soon as they got my evidence, it felt like they were like, wow, we've got a problem here. And suddenly it felt like it went away from the institutional, and working with the club, they tried to make it about individuals. And that's why, unfortunately, the last couple of weeks, some individuals have had a really tough time. But I didn't present my evidence like that. It was never intended like that, and that was never the allegation. But that's what the club, the lawyers, and the panel in particular have tried to do. I mean, to make one thing very clear, Paki is not banter. Racism is not banter. And for a person of colour, I think there's 3 people of colour on that panel, and one of them, Chief Executive, I think he's associated with National Asian Cricket Council and CEO of London Tigers, an award-winning charity organisation working with rugby and football clubs. For him to come out and do an article where he stands by the finding that Paki was used as banter, it just shows the scale of the problem we have.
There's a report, in the report, there's mentions made of your drinking, that you were a heavy drinker during your time at Yorkshire. What is your view of them linking your claims of harassment to your drinking?
Well, look, I've been clear from the offset. I was imperfect. There's things I did I felt I had to do to fit in and try and achieve my dreams. And I'm not proud of them. It's something I deeply regret. But it has no relation to racism. I should have never, ever been treated the way I got treated. When I spoke, I should have been listened to. But Yorkshire County Cricket Club and the game as a whole really has a problem in listening to the victim. And it's been gaslighting, it's been, but there is no but to racism. There is no two sides to a story when it comes to racism.
Mm. Were you ever forced to drink alcohol before you were 18 by other people at the club? And how do you view the harassment you suffered for undertaking, answering the call for prayer?
Yeah, look, my first instance of drinking, I actually got pinned down at my local cricket club, and red wine got poured down my throat.
How old were you?
15.
15, you're a Muslim, 15.
15-year-old, I got literally down my throat. The player played for Yorkshire, played for Hampshire, and it was quite a experience. I didn't touch alcohol till about around 2012, and around that time I felt like I had to do that to fit in. Like I said, I regret that massively, but again, it has no bearings on the things that I was called, and really around the loss of my son, the sort of attitude of Andrew Gale, the coach, saying to me that I'm making it more than what it is before the loss. After the loss, hardly ever anyone saying, actually, mate, are you all right? Is your wife all right? It was all about, well, he raised bullying last year. Before he raises something big, let's get rid of him.
Mm. And the harassment over the call to prayer as well, that you've seen? Yeah,
look, obviously, myself, I don't remember having that, but I know certain other people. I've seen another player fasting, for example, and if he made a mistake while fasting, from the strength and fitness conditioning coach to the physio to coaches and fellow players would be blaming him for any mistakes he made, as opposed to actually understanding
that's at Yorkshire.
That's at Yorkshire, yeah.
Mm. Okay. Tell us about Kevin and Steve, and what those names signify in Yorkshire cricket.
Well, look, Steve. Once I left the club, Chandeshwar Pujara joined the club, and Jack Brooks, I think, started it where he didn't feel the need to call him by his first name. There is an interview with Chandeshwar where he said, "I'd prefer them not to." But not only did Jack, the coaches, everyone else, the media, Yorkshire Post, the Yorkshire website, the Yorkshire Twitter page, everyone called him that. Commentators around the world, some high-profile people. It just shows, again, back to what the institutional failings and what that environment showed people and how they could behave. So that was a Steve point. Kevin was something Gary used to describe everyone of colour in a very derogatory manner, whether that be publicly, whether that be within the dressing room, whether that be opposition. This is an open secret within the England dressing room. This is anyone that's come across Gary would know that that's a phrase he used to describe people of colour. It was used in a derogatory manner all the time.
So you're saying there that effectively in the England dressing room they used the name Kevin to signify people of Afro-Caribbean origin, is that correct?
Anyone of colour.
Anyone of colour.
Anyone of colour.
And is it true that there is an England cricketer as well named as Black Dog, Kevin, as an in-joke?
Yeah, that is true, because Gary and Alex Hales at the time got really close to each other when they played for England together, and that's my understanding. Obviously, I wasn't present in that dressing room, but that's why I understand that Alex went on to name his dog Kevin because it was black.
And how do you view that?
Well, it's disgusting, to be honest, how much of a joke it was. As I said, till right at the end, I was in complete denial as to what was going on. It was only around back end of 2017, and when I lost my son, I went, you know what, hold on a minute. I've seen other players who have family tragedies and get support beyond measure. And I've just carried my son from the hospital to the graveyard, and how I'm getting treated here is not right. And to me, it became very clear that even myself, that I'd been looking the other way. And there's a real problem here, not just Yorkshire, throughout the country. And I'm going to be the one that's going to speak about this.
Thank you. Azeem, you just mentioned, obviously, not just Yorkshire. We know we've seen instances, reports with Essex very recently. Obviously, there's rumours always fly around about other counties as well. So, would you be fair to say that what you've seen in Yorkshire, is it, on the grapevine, is it replicated in other counties?
Without a shadow of a doubt. This is a problem up and down the country. I think I would like to see it as progress, that people are feeling like they can come forward and they're going to be heard, and not just be discredited, smeared about, briefed about. I think I would see that as a progress. I mean, if you look at the stats, British Asian representation in professional cricket since 2010 has had a drop of nearly 40%. The recreational game has over 30% representation from the British Asian, and that drops to a mere 4% at professional level. Now, you can do all the PR initiatives that the ECB, PCA, the counties do and tell everyone how great you are, or you can actually look into the problem. Within our community, the problem is not at recreational level, because we love the game, we want to play the game, but when we get to that between 16, 17, 18, and we have to go from academy to professional game, everything that I've spoken about are a challenge. And I would hope some pretty smart people running the game would be able to look at that, but it seems to me that whenever there's an initiative, whenever there's anything, it goes right to the grassroots, because that box is already ticked and they can tell everyone how great they have been. There was a South Asian Action Plan, which I actually launched on Sky for the ECB. I think it's initiatives like that are box ticking, a lot of tokenism, which is setting us back, and it doesn't really deal with the issue, which is in the dressing room, on the ground, because up to now, no one's felt like they can come forward and talk about it, because when you do, it's all about, well, he's a problem, he's a troublemaker, it's all him.
That's very, very powerful stuff. And also, in terms of what you think should be done specifically, because obviously there is that, you described an enormous drop-off when youths, South Asian youths, you end up with I think it was 85%, I believe, of young people at Bradford Park Avenue Nets from South Asian background. And yet, how many cricketers have represented Yorkshire from South Asian background?
Recently, no one. Currently, Adil Rashid is the only British-born member on the Yorkshire staff. It's actually scary. And you get this throughout the country. You challenge someone and you get from Birmingham, you say, yeah, well, 50% of our academy is South Asian. That makes it even worse. It's clear the problem's there. Everyone's known it for a very long time. I think it's been an open secret. It's been, as I've seen over the last 15 months, if you speak out, your life's going to be made hell. And there's no doubt my life. I mean, I sat in front of national TV and talked about the dark places this whole episode got me into. And what's happened since then? Denial, briefings, cover-ups, smearing, high-profile media people messaging other members of the media who have supported me, saying stuff like, well, the clubhouse is a live blood of a club and Asian players don't go in there. Getting subs out of Asian players like getting blood out of stone. And then personally, this guy doesn't even know me, has never spent any time with me. He's talking about my personal drinking, going out and socialising.
Was that Mr. Pugh in his article?
No, that was David Lloyd. He was
Right.
a massive England. He's been an England coach. commentator, and I found it disturbing because Sky supposedly doing this amazing work on bringing the racism to the front, and within a week of me speaking out, that's what I got sent to me, and I thought, oh God, there's some closet racist and we need to do something about it.
Well, it's very telling, isn't it? We all remember the image of the England team ensuring that Moeen Ali wasn't covered in champagne at celebration, and there we have you at 15 years old being abused by them tying you down, effectively holding you down, pinning you down, and pouring wine down your neck for some sort of banter. I think that says everything in terms of what actually is reality and what actually is pretense. Simon Job.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your testimony so far this morning. You mentioned feeling an element of denial, the impact on your mental health. I feel like you have to look the other way. I want to talk about the timing of what you've been through, because you left Yorkshire Cricket in 2018, came public with your concerns in 2020. Why that delay? Was that because of the mental health issues you were facing, and what was that like?
Yeah, look, at the time when I left, I had, I think, 4 or 5 months left on my contract. I was encouraged to sign a confidentiality form and take a sum of money, which I refused, which at that time would have been a lot of money for me. I knew my wife was struggling. I knew I was struggling. There was no way mentally I could have even considered putting myself through this trauma. I actually left the country. I went to Pakistan. I never wanted to come back.
Take your time, don't worry. How did you summon the strength to do this then? Because you've been exceptionally brave coming forward and saying what you've said. And I know how difficult that would have been, with the amount of media attention you've had and everything else. So how do you summon the strength to do this?
I don't know. I've got a bit of Karachi and a bit of Banza in me. I know that the pain that I went through for them few months, no one could ever put me through that pain again. I had an interview about my new business. I got asked a question and I got emotional. I said everything. Even at that point, I genuinely thought that there might be some humanity left in some of these individuals. But no, it was. The initial response was, well, he's not talking about Yorkshire. He hasn't mentioned them. Then it was just all about discredit. I don't know how I've done it. I really don't. This process over the last 14 months has been difficult in a lot of ways, but I've kept putting myself and my wife
Would you like to take a break, Mr. Rafiq, for a moment or two?
please.
Yeah. We'll adjourn for 5 minutes. Order. I'm going to resume the questioning with Simon Jubb.
Thank you. You're very prominent on social media nowadays. We've talked about, with the Chair's questioning, about the response from the media as a whole. How have you found the response on social media to what you've been saying publicly over the last weeks and months?
Yeah, social media has been, I felt like, just finishing off where I was, I felt all I wanted was an acceptance, an apology, an understanding, and let's try and work together to make sure it never happened again. When I raised the complaints again, it was a complete denial. I was very lucky, supported by certain members of the press, but in the winter months it became like it wasn't news again, and I felt like social media was my voice, and I felt very determined that I wasn't going to let this go, no matter how much damage it caused me, which I think we'll only find out in 4 or 5 years' time, but I was very determined to become a voice for the voiceless. I had a lot of messages from parents, kids as young as 15, throughout the country. A professional player messaged me saying, "You've just done what we've always all wanted to do but never had the balls to do it." So I felt like I had a responsibility. Look, with social media comes the negative side of it as well. My family's been abused, I've been abused, and it's fine, I can take it, and I will take it because it's something I believe incredibly passionate about, and I actually feel if Yorkshire had seen this as an opportunity to become the leaders in this space, seen this as an opportunity to actually make a real difference in society and the game, this could have gone a completely different direction, but they didn't do that, and that's why we are where we are. I think it comes with the platform that I have now, but it's important that I have that responsibility and I continue to fulfil that for people who are not being heard, and there's plenty of them.
May I ask if that abuse has gone too far in any way? The abuse you've seen on social media?
Yeah, at times. I think this last 2 weeks when the whole thing's just blown to a new level, I've been told to go back to my roots. If I don't like it, go back to where I came from. It hurts. Generally, what I do want to put on record is that I'm very thankful for all the support I've received, because I've received a hell of a lot of support on social media. There's a lot of good people out there, but I think it's human nature. You always pick up the negative ones, and they've been hurtful.
It's worthwhile never reading your notifications on Twitter. I'll hand back to the Chair at that point.
Thank you.
Damien Green.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. You paint a terrible picture of life in the Yorkshire dressing room and around the club, perhaps particularly in your younger years. Why did you go back there after you left once?
Yeah, so look, I'm glad you've asked me this, because it's something I've been asked a lot on social media. In my first spell, there was instances that happened that I didn't really see it for what they were. I was in denial. Like I said, I knew there was something that wasn't right, but I didn't quite know what it was. And to go with that, why did I go back? To be honest, start of 2016, I started really well. I was training with Derbyshire. They didn't have the finances to offer me a contract, and I was in a position where putting food on the table was really difficult, and I genuinely had no other option but to go and try and fulfill not only my dream but my family's dream, and that's just the honest why I went back. But more importantly, I think I was in denial right up to 2017. And one thing I want to talk about is for a person of colour to actually start accepting that you're being treated differently because of your race, religion, is actually quite a tough thing to take, because then after that you're always like, why? You just want answers, but you never get answers. So, and I didn't want to believe it, but when it became pretty evident around the loss of my son, I was like, look, I can't keep looking the other way. I've got to speak about this. And yeah, that's the situation really.
So you almost went back knowing that there was this niggling problem that you needed to confront.
Well, not really. Like I said, until 2017, I didn't really know for what it was. I was in denial, and this is how I presented my evidence as well. The thing was, for me, was right at the end, the last year and a half. And then when I presented my evidence, I talked about instances that took place throughout my time which show it as institutional. But right up to 2017, I didn't believe it, and nor did I ever want to believe it and even look at the issue to what it was. And even in 2017, I reported it as bullying, because for me to actually believe that I was being treated in this way because of my colour or race was quite a difficult thing to digest, and it affects me to this day.
So you say it's institutional in Yorkshire. Do you think it's institutional in cricket more widely?
Yes, I do.
And is that from experience when you obviously play other counties and so on, or indeed when you're playing club cricket? It's just infuses the whole game, does it?
I think the stats, we rely a lot on data in today's society. I think that back it up. I think other people's experiences now, and I know off the record I have had enough people talk about experiences up and down the country. It's not just at Yorkshire. And I think here the ECB's got to take a bit of responsibility as well. It's all well and good everyone throwing the book at Yorkshire. It is still my club, and whether people believe or not, I still have a sense of wanting to make sure that it's not just everyone throws a book at Yorkshire, because this is a problem up and down the country. And it's ECB's game. They're the regulators. It's their funding, and I think their actions in the last few years of the T-shirts and even around taking the knee, they were one of the first sporting teams to just stop. Whatever people's opinions is on that, it would have kept the conversation going. So I think ECB needs to take a lot of responsibility, bring a lot of things in-house, and stop palming off responsibility to advisory bodies such as the National Asian Cricket Council, because all I see that is just, separation, start of separation as well. South Asians can be dealt with them, we'll deal with everyone else.
So you think that in other, particularly sort of, if you like, urban counties, it's a contradiction in terms, but you know what I mean, it's sort of the big urban areas where there will be a large concentration of young cricketers in minorities, that there is still the kind of casual, unthinking racism that you describe so eloquently all over the place, and that's why the stats are as they are. You think that's the root of it?
I think that is the problem, that my experience is not just limited to me. And that is the problem, but that's a problem that ECB, the PCA, the counties have never wanted to deal with. I'd like an answer for that, because they've got enough evidence there to show them that that's a problem. Is it that they've just never really wanted to deal with that problem because they don't want representation from South Asian community on what it really should be from the talent that comes out from there? That's an answer for them.
Okay, and one final question, if I may, Chairman, just about Yorkshire. One of the, and I take the point that you want to talk about the institution rather than individuals, but recently Joe Root has said in response to this that he can say that at no stage has he heard any racist conversations sort of in the dressing room or around Yorkshire. Do you find that statement credible?
Yeah, look, to be clear, Root is a good man. He's never engaged in racist language. I found it hurtful because Rooty was not only Gary's housemate, Rooty was involved before he started playing for England. He was involved in a lot of them socialising nights out where I'd been called the Paki. But again, it just shows, and he might not remember it, but it just shows how normal it was in that environment, in that institution, that even a good man like him doesn't see it for what it is. Yeah, it was strange, but like I said, it's the environment and the institution that made it such a norm that people don't remember it. And it's not going to affect Joe. It's something I remember every day, but I don't expect Joe to.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Rafiq, for your testimony this morning. I must say, I had no idea that Kevin was a term that could be used as racial abuse. When did that start, and how prevalent and widespread is that in cricket?
Well, it's a term that's used by Gary. Gary started this term. I don't have a knowledge of where and how, but it was something used in a derogatory manner for people of colour.
You mentioned earlier on that Gary Ballance was someone who displayed, and the phrase you used, which I assume is a very strong Yorkshire cricketer, white rose values. Did you mean that in a derogatory way when you said that? And what did you mean by that?
Well, a couple of days ago, I seen that 14 members of the staff signed a letter to the board a month ago that they should have come out and discredited me and attacked me for my personal behaviours, and that I didn't share the White Rose values. I mean, if the White Rose values means that you're racist, then yeah, I didn't share them values. And look, the institution, whether it wants to accept it or not, there's enough. Imran Khan in '99 talked about it. Terry Rooney, an MP in 2004, talked about it. It's been an open secret. We've got a statement from someone as far as 30 years back. We've had someone speak to us off the record and nearly come forward a couple of times about incidents in '92 that involves people who are coaches now, but they were players then. So if the White Rose values, because I don't know what the White Rose values are, but if it involves racism, yeah, I don't share them.
Obviously, Gary Ballance has issued an apology about his behaviour, saying it was I think the phrase he used was a friendly verbal attack. What do you make of that?
Well, first and foremost, I didn't see that Gary actually apologised in that statement. I wanted to, throughout, like I said, I think this panel and the lawyers and Yorkshire hierarchy have made this about individuals. I want to make sure that it doesn't become about that, but I think all I've ever, and even on the day that Gary got named, I actually tried for him not to get named, because I knew once people start getting named, it would become an uncomfortable place for a lot of people, and individuals are going to have a tough time. But I think the responsibility here, and for where we are at the hands of Yorkshire Chief Executive Mark Arthur, Martin Moxon, and the lawyers, Squire Patton Boggs, and I think the panel, as people who have read the report, it's staggering. There's a lot of things in there which beggars belief, and I mean, I hope the report can be published so people, not only the people who were perpetrators, but the people who have excused this sort of behaviour can be held accountable.
Oh, I mean, on that point about individuals, Michael Vaughan has said, I think he said this yesterday actually, that his reputation is being trashed unfairly. What's your reaction to that?
I think it's important on Michael that we don't make it all about Michael. Look, it was a long time ago. Michael might not remember it, as I said about earlier, because it doesn't mean anything to him. But three of us, myself, Adele and Rana, we remember it. I've spoke to Adele at length about this. And Michael to use this platform at the Daily Telegraph to try and discredit before even anything being spoken about was, again, he clearly had a snippet of my statement. I was promised that when I make allegations about people, it will be put to them, and when the allegations are made about me, it will be put to me. That process wasn't followed for me, so he used this platform at the Daily Telegraph to tell everyone that he hadn't said these things, but then to go on and put a snippet of my statement out and then talk about other things I thought was completely wrong. Like I said, he probably doesn't remember it because it doesn't mean anything to him.
You referenced the report, and although we're not publishing the report on advice, but what was something of interest to me was that the scope of the report originally, the terms of reference originally, were changed halfway through to stop the law firm from making a finding on whether Yorkshire Cricket Club is institutionally racist. Did you notice that when you read the report, and do you have a view about that as to why that might have happened? It's obviously a question we can put to others as well, but I just wondered what your view was on it.
Yeah, I noticed it when I got the report. Interesting, I didn't find out through the process. Throughout this whole process, I think I spoke. I think they had this feeling that, like it happens in generally when someone talks about their feelings and stuff on subjects that are uncomfortable, it's difficult to prove. My Allah's been with me, and whenever the problem's that big at Yorkshire that they didn't even care, and there's internal emails to back up my stuff, there's board minutes, and when I presented my evidence, I felt like straight away there was like, right, we've got a problem here. How do we take it in a completely different angle? And I think that's what they've tried to do. They said for the delays, the law firm, an international law firm, apparently struggled to spell the name Wilcoin properly, and that was the reason for one of the delays. The whole thing is staggering. The panel, the last email we had from Dr. Azeem Rafiq was explaining to us what would happen next. We emailed him. To this day, we don't have a response. So I think the way the whole thing is being, so I feel like there's three facets to this: my career and what happened, this investigation, independent investigation, which has been far from independent, and then the cover-up. I mean, to say that members of the panel, while this investigation was live, were being entertained by Yorkshire County Cricket Club at the test match at Headingley just shows the arrogance of these people, that they felt so untouchable that little old Azeem Rafiq, no one's going to believe him, and we'll just discredit him.
Can I just finally ask you, and you may not be able to answer this because I realise I'm talking about a third person, but one of my constituents wrote to me and said they've been writing a book which has a chapter on the subject of discrimination in sport and cricket, and that one of the people they interviewed was your sister Anna, who does work for Leicestershire, or has done work for Leicestershire Cricket Club. Have you spoken to her about the work that she's done there? And I suppose my question is there evidence through that work of this being a much wider problem in cricket?
Well, my family didn't know what I was going through till last year when I did the Sky interview. They weren't aware of it. I've spoken to Amna at length since, and then she's opened up about her experiences at Leicester. And I have no doubt whatsoever this is a problem up and down the country. Leicester has specifically has a massive Asian community and hardly any representation. And they've had a chief executive, a first British Asian chief executive for a few years in Wasim Khan, and from everyone I've spoke to, that did more damage. And unfortunately, it's the fear of the institution or whatever it is within our own community, and I've not shied away from saying the truth, even when it's been difficult to hear, whether it's for myself, my own community or my family. But throughout this whole process, my own community and a lot of businesses in Bradford have been helping Yorkshire try and cover up for whatever reason, whether that's fear of the institution or wanting to progress themselves. And it just shows how difficult this issue is and how big the problem is. I think if people had have taken Terry Rooney's experience in 2004 or Imran Khan, they a bit more as a let's learn from it and let's make proper change, we won't be here today. But unfortunately, as it's shown over the last 15 months, people just don't want to listen. It's uncomfortable. Good people who are not racist want to look the other way.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Just to clarify, we will be publishing your witness statement to the committee in full at the end of this hearing. We're not choosing to publish the report. Frankly, it's Yorkshire's mess. They should be the one publishing this report and explaining themselves, rather than hoping the parliamentary committee will do it for them so they don't get sued. So, but to be very, very clear, every word you put in your witness statement will be in the public domain at the end of this session.
Thank you.
Clive Efford and then Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for coming to give evidence today, Azeem. You've mentioned that you don't want this to be just a Yorkshire issue. You think it's wider in the game. You've just answered that you think there are issues at Leicestershire, for instance. So, but you went to Derby for a period where you seem to have had a happy experience. So, could you just tell us a little bit about what your experience there was, and how widespread you feel that this problem is within the game of cricket and beyond, actually, because other sports like football have similar problems in the higher echelons of football. We don't see the representation that we do on the pitch. What are your comments?
I had the most enjoyable month on loan at Derby. From the minute I got there, the captain and the coach made me feel welcomed, valued. I have nothing but good words to say about my time at Derby, but it was only a short time. I don't know what the dealings is below the level, but representation again there is in short. But I can't speak highly enough of my little stint there for a month.
And in Yorkshire, there's a whole hierarchy of cricket that's been set up around South Asian cricketers because of the ceiling that there was, the lack of opportunity to get through into first-class cricket. Is that different from other counties in your experience, or is there something peculiar to Yorkshire?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
Well, in the sense that there is a whole pyramid of cricket within Yorkshire around South Asian cricketers, and set up by them over the last 50 years. And that seems to have been set up because there was a lack of opportunity to get into first-class cricket. So is that in your experience or your knowledge, is that commonplace in cricket, or is that peculiar to Yorkshire?
I think you mean the leagues that have been set up that are... I don't think they help, but I think people just got sick and tired of not being given opportunities. And the problem is not just... This is where the ECB needs to take control, because we had a situation over the winter where, coincidentally, my local club, Barnsley, and their chairman described an overseas player from West Indies from another player, and he put on Facebook that this guy's he was selling sunglasses to me in Tenerife. So the problem actually is right at the bottom, and it needs the ECB to look where their money's going and make sure that people responsible for young kids coming into the game at an early age are educated for what's right and wrong. And I think for too long the ECB has not done enough.
So can I just ask you about the ECB, because this whole situation in Yorkshire has been in the open for quite some time. Were you approached at all by the ECB when you made your complaints known?
Yeah, so when George Bell published his article, I had a phone call from Tom Harrison. I subsequently had a Zoom call with him. I felt like he was listening, but then they took the stance that they're going to trust Yorkshire to do the right thing, and then as regulators come in to sort of hold Yorkshire to account. Constitutionally, I don't know how that works, but it was difficult that for me to take through the winter, because I kept begging the ECB, the PCA. The PCA kept telling me, "Oh, we agree with Yorkshire, independent investigation." I'm telling them, "Look, they're not doing the right thing. They're changing processes. They're not communicating with me. This is going to end up in a car crash for everyone. Please step in. Please step in." At no point any of the two organisations wanted to do that. Until really, to be honest, on that Monday when the article broke in the Crick Info, and the sponsors, I think, once the sponsors started going and the MPs started being vocal about it, it was at that point that ECB came in. I'm sure they're going to be asked this, and they'll have their reasons for it. But on a human point, I felt like if someone else had told me that they were suicidal, and then he was ringing you saying, please help, I'd forget the constitution and any regulatory, and I'd jump straight in and go, right, we need to help the human, because it left me over the winter. There's been some really dark moments, and at one point the PCA they actually called the police and reported me missing, which was like, I mean, I'm sat with my family and I get a phone call saying, you've been reported missing. I'm like, and I didn't feel like that was somewhat, they did that because they were concerned for me or worried about me. I felt like that was done to tick a box just in case I killed myself, and they can say, well, we did what we could do.
So can I just clarify, you were in regular contact with the ECB after the publication of the article, and you were making it clear to them what your emotional state was, and there was a failure there to intervene. Is that your...
I wouldn't say regular, but I made it very clear to them several times through the winter, but I was in regular contact with the PCA. I found the PCA stance as Professional Cricketers Association incredibly inept. It was, we've got members on both sides. I was like, so you're protecting the perpetrators, and you've no interest in where this is taking me. Throughout, PCA kept telling me, once the report comes out, we will support you, we will stand up for right, and we'll make sure this changes. Once the report comes out, they said, we've got no powers, we'll just push the push the ECB. So again, an organisation that really should have been there for me and supported me, left me on my own and fight on my own.
And the inquiry, the investigation, there were a lot of people who didn't respond to invites to give evidence. Why do you think that was?
Fearful, not trusting Yorkshire. They know they've done wrong, some of them. Lawyers, I think it's the list could go on. I think that's for them to answer why they didn't play a part. But the way this investigation was done was, I mean, best described as shoddy. Like as I said, an international law firm. I found staggering when I heard that they couldn't spell Wilcoin properly. They've not contacted, to this day, they've not contacted Tino Best, Rana Naveed-Ulasan, who publicly came and backed me, age group coaches who have publicly talked about that they got told pick a few of them but not too many of them packies. Supporters have wanted to come forward. They've all had to go through HR at Yorkshire, which is, I mean, her behaviour in it all again is not really an example that needs to be set for young people moving forward. So it's been done very shoddily, and yeah, I think people who have declined to play a part, they need to answer why.
So do you think that Yorkshire at all made an attempt to reassure those people and get them to give evidence in this process?
To be honest, I don't know what Yorkshire's done. I think Yorkshire throughout has tried to discredit me, brief about me, be in denial. I don't think they've had any interest. And even as we stand now, Mark Arthur resigned, and the resignation had no remorse. It was more a CV about how he'd signed a catering contract at Headingley, which again just shows the attitude of these people.
Well, let me put it another way. Do you think the treatment of you was likely to encourage other people to come forward and participate in the investigation?
I think now, possibly, but for a long time through the 15 months, no. Why would you? Why would you come forward? Your family gets brought into it. Your wife gets nailed on social media. Your sister's life's made hell. Your dad is ill, suffering. Why would you? And
last question, just given the how widespread and open you've described the racism at Yorkshire. How could in your opinion, do you think the people at the top of the cricket club could have possibly been unaware of the level of racism that was taking place in the club?
Look, I think from the minute they come in, so people who have been there come in as 16-year-old players, they just see their seniors behave in that manner and they think that's acceptable. No one's ever said to them, stop. I think they could have had that excuse before I spoke to them, but I think after I spoke to them there is no excuse that they weren't unaware. I made it perfectly clear in as much detail as I possibly could what I had felt and what other people had felt, but look, other people are still fearful of coming forward, even at Yorkshire, but yeah, I think to say that they were unaware would be an excuse for them, and I think we need to get away from looking for excuses for any of these individuals.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for coming and talking to us today. I want to start by just actually quoting something back you said earlier in evidence, where you said, it's only little Azeem Rafiq, no one will believe him. Can I just say, I believe you, and I'm sure this committee believes you, so don't for a second think that we don't believe you. And I think most decent people actually in this country believe you. But I want to, you've talked a lot about some of the things, some of the apologies that you clearly don't feel are real apologies that a number of people have said, and you don't want to talk about individuals, that's fair enough. Have any of the people, whether the people discussed here or the people who've given these kind of apologies, actually reached out to you privately and apologised to you personally?
After my Sky interview the next morning, I took a phone call from Matthew Hoggard, and he just basically said, look, I didn't realise, I'm really sorry if some of the comments I made you feel the way you've described it. I just want to apologise. And you know what? When someone does that, I was like, mate, thank you, really appreciate it. I bumped into a friend a few months after, and he just said, look, we didn't realise we were having that effect on you. If you'd have said to us, we would have stopped. So I'm really sorry, and both of them two people, I was very appreciative of the apology, because really that's all I wanted, an acceptance, an apology. I'd like to ask Martin Moxon, still to this day, why he felt like that was the right thing to do after the loss of my son. But apart from that, all I've ever wanted is some sort of acceptance, an apology, and let's work together to make sure it doesn't happen to my kids, and I can let my kid go and play cricket.
Because that, this committee have looked at racism in other sports over the years I've been on this committee, and other issues, whether it's equal pay or discrimination on the grounds of gender, all sorts of issues we've tackled in sport. And part of the problem is sometimes when people are confronted, if they actually just say, we had no idea, we're really sorry, and start to do something about it. But from what you've been saying to us today, in general, that has not happened, really. People have not, they've known, and tell me if I'm describing this wrong, but my interpretation of what you've been telling us is they've thought, oh, we've got a problem and that sponsors are disappearing, people are looking at us, but not actually acknowledging that they've got a problem in the way they've been behaving and at a senior level the way they've been managing cricket. Is that right? Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's it really. I just don't think the game wants to listen, and that's the wider game. I've heard counties running around trying to ring South Asian players to see if they can offer them some roles somewhere in the hope that no one comes forward and talks about their experience. If the game as a whole had taken the approach of, well, what Lord Patel's done is a hotline, a whistleblower hotline. I think once people be listened to, I think there's a quick rush to move forward. I think before we move forward, the game needs to listen to a lot of people that have suffered a lot of abuse up and down the country. And I think till it starts listening to that and hearing it, as opposed to going, yeah, but we can't move forward. And I think that's the first step towards it, what Lord Patel's already put in at Yorkshire, and I think I would encourage every county and the ECB to do the same.
You're absolutely right. And can I just contrast the way you've been treated at Yorkshire Cricket compared to your everyday life? I mean, we know there is a problem with racism in our society. Thank goodness I don't think it's anywhere near what is going on in cricket, but there is a problem. Can you just contrast, your everyday life compared to what you've experienced there, what you've experienced in everyday life? It sounds to me as if this is in a completely different league. None of it's acceptable, but is that a fair assessment of where we are?
Yeah, look, my everyday life, for as long as I've known, it's just been cricket. It'd be difficult for me to compare, but I think cricket and professional sport in general, it's a lot worse than society. Again, the thing that I hear a lot is, yeah, but it's a societal problem. Cricket is part of the same society. If we make changes within cricket, we're making changes as a society. It's such a cop-out to go, yeah, but it's a societal problem. Every one of us is responsible for the society that we live in. So instead of palming it off to other people, if we look and actually, cricket is where I was, cricket is where ECB is, instead of saying, oh, it's a societal problem, we need to sort that first. No, let's sort out where we are every day, and hopefully that will have the impact in society in the long term anyway.
And finally, you've mentioned the PCA a few times. You should be there to protect you and give you advice and support. What do you think's gone wrong there? Because clearly they're not doing that, and it's absolutely inappropriate to say we've got people on either side. It's quite common in the trade union world or any representational world that you represent people on all sides, but that doesn't stop you representing and supporting people. It sounds to me as if they have really just walked away from the problem. Could you describe a little about how the PCA have behaved?
I think the problem they had is my PDM at the time, Matthew Wood, who I thought was in my corner, was actually working for Yorkshire, working with Yorkshire, and in communication with, he'd been a Yorkshire player in the past as well. So I think it was all cosy there, and that only became evident from the subject data access request. So I think they had an issue there. And I had a phone call with one of their lawyers for 3 minutes, and he turned around to me and said, "You don't have a case." It was incredibly hurtful, and to find out later that the reason they said that is because if they'd have backed me, it would have taken their whole budget. I would have rather he said to me, "Look, we can't afford," as opposed to saying you've got no case, because that's what it made me feel like is no one believes you. We don't believe you. We believe the PDM who I thought was a top man, but obviously, like I said, what you see at the front and what's happening behind the scenes, and the subject data access request was actually, it was probably an eye-opener for me as well. Even I didn't realise how bad it was happening behind the scenes. When I spoke to them, I tried to tell them what I was feeling. I had no proof. But when we started getting the proof, it's like, wow. I mean, Inclusivity Diversity Board member is talking about how to brush it, deal with it. There was literally no interest in actually dealing with my allegations, and I think that's very clear. As bad as that report is, I think the one thing that is very clear in that report is how, I think the words are, they were dismissive of my allegations and wanted to wash their hands off me.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Steve Ryan.
Hello, Azeem. It's a horror show, isn't it, what you're describing? You were asked earlier about this issue in Yorkshire and other clubs. It's come up in different questions. Is it an issue in other clubs? And you said without question. Without question, you said. I don't suppose many of the other counties will be looking forward to this exchange, but I'm not asking you to name names, but I'm asking you to name counties. You've put yourself out there, and by doing so, you then attract attention wanted and unwanted. You also become a place around which people can feel they can talk. Have other players from other counties been in touch with you to say, yes, this is exactly what I'm experiencing too. I thought it was just me. I thought I was blowing it out of proportion. Some of the stuff you've said to us this morning. You said it's without question a problem anywhere else, so can you tell the committee about that? Where?
Yeah, look, I've had messages from people who have played at Leicester. I've had messages from a guy who played at Middlesex. I've had messages from people who played at Nottinghamshire. So I've had messages from quite a few. Some people obviously are still pretty scared for them to talk about it. Some still say, should I have called it out? Is it racism? I don't know. I think the one recurrence is the word "packy" was used a lot. Right. I think that the gentleman that spoke recently about after 9/11 being called a bomber. Maurice Chambers spoke out from Essex yesterday about misfielding in fielding drill and saying it's the black thing. Eat this banana, you fucking monkey. Stuff like that. It's pretty clear. It's there. Some people are still pretty scared, and they are at the really early stages of their career.
So some people are pretty scared, but some people are on an earlier stage of the journey. You know, you said, is it just bullying? You know, am I blowing it out of proportion? And then eventually you realised what it was. So do you find that you've become a bit of a mentor to others then, who are saying, you know, maybe it's just bullying, maybe I've got this wrong? Are you then able to talk to them and say, well, does it sound familiar? Is it eerily familiar, the thing you're hearing from those clubs you've mentioned?
I want to become the voice for the voiceless. I want to try and help people that are suffering this without it getting to a point where it's got for me. I want to help young players coming in the game, getting them ready for the challenges, but actually counties to change their environments and cultures so these people can achieve their dreams. My dream, I wasn't able to achieve it. I've tried to stay away throughout the process in talking about my cricket, but it was, I think, with the stats and stuff around 2017, it was pretty clear that I had the ability, and with my captaincy skills, to go right to the top. But these instances, these experiences, really weighed down on me, and I think the last 15 months will show that I can deal with a lot from the outside, but when it's the inside, it eats me and it kills me. Some of the things that have hurt me the most has been the PCA, who I thought would be in my corner, certain members of the South Asian community. So I think it's important that now that I have been brave or stupid, whatever you want to call it, to stand up to an institution and hold them to account, I want to try and help the young lads who are wanting to achieve their dreams prepare better, but hopefully we can actually get the institutions to change so they don't have to, they can be respected.
So then on that thought, you gave the stats earlier about the youth game into the professional game, and they're striking, aren't they? They don't lie. Obviously, there's a tragedy for all those individuals who don't go from playing pretty good youth cricket, showing great promise in practicing, to playing professional game, and they've missed out on that. But so have you, right? Cricket is not my game. I don't know a lot about the game of cricket, but I know you were a good cricketer. So what does the England cricket club, the England cricket team, for instance, what have they missed out on from not having your services and not having the services of all those thousands of other young boys and girls who maybe have been put off and not gone through to play and achieve their potential? What have we missed out on? How many more Ashes might we have won?
A hell of a lot of talent, a better representation of the country. I think missed out on a lot, really, to be honest. There's a lot of cricketers, a lot of Asian cricketers that have been subject to this, and not just Asian, black cricketers as well. I think the representation of black cricketers within professional cricket right now is actually worrying from where it was. And I think the game, ECB, really needs to look at that and start doing something tangible to make them changes as opposed to some PR initiatives.
Yeah, okay. I'm just going to come back to the personal finally, but just because I was asking you about other county teams, and you've become a rallying point for people to contact you, and you named a few counties from which people have contacted you. Have young people in other sports been in touch with you to say they recognise what you've said?
Not young people. I've had people from other industries in different lines of work. I got an email from someone who works in for a big utility company, and the similarities were just same. It was all just the same, but I've not had young people from other sports.
What about other sports, men and women playing elite sport?
No, it's not something I've not heard from other sports. But like I said, I don't know how big the story has been or people are aware of it in other sports. I know when I was playing cricket, I didn't really know about anything else that was going on in the world.
So then finally on that, and you may not find this easy to answer, but I'll ask it anyway. You're obviously quite an emotional person. You've been through an emotional time, and I don't blame you. It's emotional listening to your evidence this morning, and I think my colleagues would all concur with that. You've spoken a number of times about it was your dream and your family's dream for you to play this game. So growing up in Barnsley, what would you say to 10, 11-year-old boys in Barnsley and girls in Barnsley today, hearing this, reading this, who might have that same dream and whose family might have that same dream for them? What would you say to them?
This is why where we've got to is quite difficult, because I can't even imagine as a parent hearing me speak now why I would ever want my kids to go anywhere near the game, and I don't want my son to go anywhere near cricket. But I think this is where it's the ECB and the counties to show that they can actually use this as an opportunity for the change and get them parents to understand and show them that we've messed up, but we're going to do this, this and this and make sure it doesn't happen to your kid. But as a parent, if I was a parent, I would say keep an eye on your kids, keep an eye on them, because this is reality. As a parent, I would not let my kid go there and just leave them at the hands of these people, because I think it's pretty clear in professional sports and other issues as well. People go from playing to coaching and they're handed responsibility for kids, and they just do not know how to behave in front of kids.
You obviously have a love-hate relationship with the game, but it was struck when you said Yorkshire's still my club. And it's still your game, isn't it? So just in conclusion then, but by how many will we win the Ashes?
5-0.
Excellent. I will leave it there, Chairman. That's the answer we wanted.
Glenn McGrath.
Thank you, Azeem.
I think hell will freeze over before we win 5-0. Alex Davis-Jones.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Rafiq, for your testimony today, which I know will help so many people just by you speaking up, so thank you for that. You mentioned that we need to use this as an opportunity for real change. People have spoken up before, but nothing has changed. You mentioned tokenism. We had an urgent question in the House of Commons last week, and the government's response was that Cindy Butts has been appointed an independent commissioner for equity in cricket. Do you have faith in this, or do you see it as more tokenism?
So I spoke to Cindy a few months ago, and I said to her, look, I'm going to encourage everyone to come and tell you everything, because you need to hear it. Because I want you to hear the experience, and then you'll be judged on your actions. It's all well and good setting up a year-long equity commission. It sounds but Cindy's been part of other things, very reputable. But but we've seen it all before. This investigation was apparently an international law firm. The panel had employment specialist, people of colour, and it was meant to be independent, and it just showed that these things are a little bit of a let's delay tactic to actually deal with the issue. I would actually encourage the ECB, and I hope you guys are going to later as well, is action's needed, and it's needed now. To be honest, we're sick and tired of these equity commissions and these inquiries. Sick and tired of it. All we're asking for is equality, to be treated fairly, regardless of the colour of our skin or the religion we follow, and just respect as a human race.
Yeah, absolutely. So you want action from the ECB. What do you recommend happening so that we turn a corner and that we can get more South Asian young people into the game, men and women, and they feel included and as part of the team, which is what you desperately wanted?
I think, like I said, a hotline, a whistleblower hotline where people can come and speak, listen to them, actually listen to them, and then I think a real accountability. I think it's important that, as much as it's about the institution, that it's important that the way Yorkshire's handled this, that there's accountabilities to them leaders. I think some have already faced it, but there's still some there. So everyone knows that if you do this, there's going to be repercussions. And I would hold that as right at the top of the list. But we need organic change. Tokenism is something I want to avoid, and if that's the angle I see the ECB going down, I will call it out, because I think they've done that in the past. Yeah. And putting a person of colour between a people non-colour and saying, look how great we are, that's not what we want. And the problems are in the dressing room, so deal with that. Yeah. Don't go to PR initiatives of getting more kids playing. We haven't got a problem there. So there needs to be something set up to keep an eye on that throughout the country.
Yeah, and you mentioned we need to change the dressing rooms, we need to change that culture of it being acceptable. We've heard from some female cricketers about some of the abuse and harassment they have faced, and the misogyny that takes place in female cricket. Have you ever witnessed any behaviour or language in the changing room around misogyny or homophobia? And would you say that cricket also has a problem in those areas?
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't recall it like I do the experiences I have. Yeah. But it would be wrong of me to sit here and say that it doesn't. Of course it does. And as I said, the ECB need to seriously look at things themselves. There is no reason for them to have separate bodies where they're palming off their responsibility and effectively asking up to clean the mess off their doorstep. The ECB need to take responsibility of their own house. It's their game. They're the regulators. It's their funding. Cricket's different to football. Counties and clubs cannot function without the ECB. So that's why it's important that ECB take the lead on this. And I think the action time is now enough. We're in 2021 now. We shouldn't even be having this conversation.
I agree. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Let me say, first of all, Azeem, that you are an extraordinarily powerful and lucid witness, and thank you for coming today. You did say that you called for disciplinary action, and yet only last month Yorkshire said that no one at the club would face disciplinary action. What is your reaction to that?
When I saw that post come up, I was staggered. I was like, I mean, at what point are these people, are they going to read the room? At what point are these people going to realise what they're doing? When I read it, I was angry. It actually made me feel like them saying, well, we've got all this pressure, so we're apologising. We don't give a damn what you say. Middle of last year, again, while the investigation was live and they were aware of the allegations against Gary was made captain again. He was given a 3-year contract by these leaders while they knew all of this. And then I understand Roger had gone to members' forums and said to people that it didn't involve anyone at the club. So I think even as close as 2 weeks ago, they genuinely felt they could hide this. And I think that's what they tried to do throughout.
And have you seen a shifting of position?
I think they've been left with no option. I don't think they accept anything. I don't think Mark Arthur thinks he's done anything wrong. I don't think Martin feels he's in wrong in any way, or Andrew, or anyone else in that place. We talked about Michael earlier. He seems to have taken the same stance as the club. Deny, deny, deny. Yeah, I mean, I think they've been left with no choice because, and I want to thank the politicians for getting involved, and the media. Look, the sports press, the cricket media, there's some top people, and they've not let the calls die down.
Right, and earlier, as Steve Ryan pointed out, you did say that it was my club, so clearly you have some affection for the club, and despite all you've been through, what would you say to the new chairman? What action would you like to see the new chairman take?
Look, it is my club. I'm a cap player at that club. So it hurts me to where we've got, to be honest. I should have never had to get here. People who have been close to it will back this up. I have tried endless time to the detriment of myself, really, for this to not end up in what I see as a car crash. Kamlesh got reached out straight away. We had a good 5-6 hours, and I challenged him on a lot of things. There was things that he said which I didn't like, but I respected his honesty. And I feel like he's going to do the right thing, but I've made it very clear to them that I don't see this as the end. I actually see this as the start, and I will be watching. And if it needs calling out tomorrow or in 5 minutes' time, I will call it out. I don't want to live in a society, I don't want my kids to live in a society that lets this happen for any longer.
If the club were to reach out to you and say, can you help us get back? Can you help us get our sponsorship back? Can you help us improve? Would you be prepared to do that?
Well, if they got in touch and said, can you help us get our sponsorship back, I would be very hesitant in that, because if that's the mindset, then it's not genuine. Mm-hmm. Kamlesh has proposed a few things. I think, as Steve said earlier, I feel like there's a lot of people that are prepared to work on the inside and bring I feel like I've been brave enough to call an institution out, and I would, in the short term especially, prefer to actually sit on the outside and keep holding them to account and keep making sure they know that someone's watching. I don't want to be, and a lot of people have done that, I don't want to be the sort of person that talks about the issue and then there's jobs and opportunities offered left, right, centre, and then I go and sit on the other side and tell everyone how great it is, because I just want to speak about the facts.
You feel your position is that of the critic observing then?
Well, and help them push the right way. I want to help them push the right way, but I don't want the system to think that they can induce me with any job offers, but I don't care about my personal. I think that's pretty evident from the last 15 months. I couldn't give two jots what I do in my life. I've been brought up in a way where morals and values are a lot more stronger to me, and you know what, in 5 years' time, if no one wants to give me a job, that's fine, I don't care. But if in 5 years' time there's more kids playing the game and we have a game that is a lot nicer, then I'll be very proud of what I've done.
And finally, do you think it's time the government intervened in cricket, and if so, what do you think the government should do?
I mean, I think it showed the power with the last couple of weeks with politicians intervening and the government intervening, and I think it's important that government watch over this as close to it as I am, because I think it'll make a big change in society. I really do. And we all love cricket. Well, the ones that do. We just want...
I love it, I just don't understand.
All we want is the game I grew up watching, or what I thought the game to be. We just want a nice game for everyone, and that's regardless of race, gender, any other things.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joe.
And finally, John Nicholson.
Thank you very much, Chair. In a morning of very striking testimony, one story has stood out for me, really, and it's the story you told about being 15 years of age and an older man pouring red wine down your throat. Did nobody, first of all, was anybody else there? And secondly, did nobody intervene when that was happening to you?
Yeah, we were in a car. I've got a witness that was there who's corroborated the events. Quite frankly, no one did. Looking back, to be honest, and talking about all these experiences and the question about why go back and why not raise it earlier, I'm angry at myself for looking the other way. I just, clearly I wasn't strong enough. Clearly I didn't have the
I think
strength.
You're being too hard on yourself. You're only 15, and at 15 years of age, all of us do things to try and fit in. It's human nature. The adults in the room, or in this case the adults in the car, should have intervened. There are lots of scoundrels in the stories that you've told us today. Are there any heroes? Can you think of people who've stood up for you?
Look, Tino Best, Rana Navid, Tino especially, being involved in media, coming out and publicly backing me, could affect his future. Rana, he's a coach now.
And at the time when the bullying was happening, did people stand up for you?
Look, no. Nobody. And I've talked
That's
about...
extraordinary. So you're in the changing room, feeling isolated, subjected to bullying like this, having wine poured down your throat, as you told us, all the other things you've told us, and you can't remember a single person who stood up for you.
No, I think that's the institution. You had people that were openly racist, and then you had the bystanders, and a lot of people watched it happen, and no one felt like it was important, or because it was such a norm that no one felt strong enough to actually stand up and go, no, what are you doing? Stop.
Do you think class was an issue as well as race?
To be honest, I'm not sure on that.
Because it's quite a posh game, isn't it? We know that you're more likely to play cricket if you go to public school. Scotland public school, school for the public, but in English, in the English use of the word, posh private school, you're more likely to end up, aren't you, as a cricketer if you go to one of those schools?
Well, again, I don't know the exact stats around it, but a gentleman's done a PhD around that, funded by the ECB, incidentally, but his research has been ignored. But in the last few years, I think there's a massive class divide, and you are, I don't know the exact term, so I don't want to quote the numbers, but you are a lot more likely to, you're a lot more likely to be a professional cricketer if you go to a private school, but you're even more likely to be a professional cricketer if you're white and you go to a private school.
You quoted some figures earlier on, which I thought were very striking, which is that amongst recreational cricketers, 30% are English Asians. But in the professional game, only 4% are English Asians. I mean, that's a shocking statistic, because it shows that there's lots of people out there who want to play cricket professionally, but they just can't get in to play cricket because of the colour.
As I said, data, stats, they're pretty revealing. You dive in more and it's even worse.
Why do you think the representation of minorities has increased in football and decreased in cricket?
Look, I'm not fully in tune with football, but what I've seen over the last year and a half is some high-profile footballers showing the world how to behave, in Marcus Rashford and Jordan Anderson, and clearly there's been some sort of shift in football. I think cricket's, a lot of people said this to me at the start, we would have never expected it from cricket, because I think cricket has been allowed to for a long time. It's a boys' network. People that come in as a player in '92 are still director of cricket at Yorkshire now. It just shows how close that network is, and no one's ever been a whistleblower. No one's ever had the courage to come forward, because of the fear of not being believed.
It's funny you should say it's a boys' network, because people viewing this at home won't see the audience that we have here sitting listening, but I think there's probably about 30 people behind you, and there are 2 women amongst the 30. Not that we're in a very good position to talk as a committee, but nonetheless it's quite striking that that's the audience that's drawn to this session to listen. Do you think that you lost your career because of racism?
Yeah, on the audience, and the audience, the women are not here because the game doesn't invite women. It's so easy to look at but they're not interested, or actually, is the game doing enough? Are the leaders within the game doing enough? Do I believe I lost my career to racism? Yes, I do.
That must be a terrible feeling.
Horrible. Yeah, horrible.
Because you're still a young man, so to be looking at your age at a lost career must be very upsetting.
Yeah, horrible. But you know what? Maybe what was written for me was this. Maybe that's just what it was. I'm a massive believer everything happens for a reason. And like I said, hopefully in 5 years' time, we're going to see a big change. And I can look back at it that I did something that is far bigger than any runs I got or any wickets I got. But yeah, it's horrible. It hurts.
Well, I hope you're right, and I hope that your testimony today will be part of delivering that change. And finally, you've mentioned your wife lots of times, and in amongst all your travails, it seems clear you've got a very strong partnership with her. And that of course is the bedrock of lots of people's happy lives. I just want to ask you how she has coped with this and how she is now coping with all that you as a family have had to endure.
Struggled and still continues to. Over the last 15 months we've got 2 young kids. One's just over 2 and one's about to turn 1. And they've not had a dad really, because all I've been worried about is Yorkshire going out to discredit me, and how I'm going to deal with it, and dealing with lawyers, dealing with press. So yeah, challenging, but I just hope today provides some sort of closure, and I can treat her for what she deserves.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Azeem. It's been very interesting and very powerful today. That concludes our first panel. We're going to take a short adjournment of 2 minutes as we set up our second panel. Order, order. Order, order. This is the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee. This is our second panel into our inquiry into racism and Yorkshire cricket. We're joined here by the former chair, Roger Hutton, who has very bravely and kindly actually answered the call to come in and wanted to come in. We do note as a committee that Mr Arthurs and Mr Moxon were both invited, and they have both chosen not to attend, despite being there for longer and by all accounts having much more of an impact in terms of the mishandling of Mr Rafiq's case. First of all, you've been sat in the room throughout this, Mr Hutton. What do you make of what you've heard from Mr Rafiq?
Azeem was incredibly powerful. That's what he spoke brilliantly, and it just makes you desperately sad for what he's gone through. I have apologised on a couple of occasions, but I would repeat my profound apology for the experiences he's had with the club, and he's been phenomenally brave. I thought he was very articulate today, and I think he's done an outstanding job today.
Mm. And what are your views of the fact that Mr Arthurs and Mr Moxon have chosen not to attend, and what are your views in terms of the way in which they have handled this inquiry?
I'm deeply disappointed they're not here today. I'm deeply disappointed that essentially Azeem's allegations, and there are a number, stem from 2007 to 2018. I volunteered to be chairman in April 2020, 18 months after he'd left, and I would have thought it would have been right for the club to have representatives today from people who were there while Azeem was employed and had a direct relationship with him. I've literally never met Azeem until this morning. And I would have also thought it would have been good for the club to have someone who was currently representative of themselves this morning. So,
are they cowards?
I think the answer is for the two executives. They found this whole process very difficult. They have failed, in my view, to accept the gravity of the situation. They have not wanted to apologise, and they have not wanted to take the recommendations of the panel going forward. Azeem made a very powerful point this morning about this being an opportunity for the club to change. And at the very, very start, when the investigation took place, that's what I and the non-executives thought this would be. But sadly, it's turned out to be the reverse.
At what stage did you know that was going to happen, that effectively that the permanent directors on the board were going to effectively blockade any attempts to move the club forwards?
There were a number of signals throughout this process. There was a moment when I was asked if we could abandon the investigation. One of the executives.
Sorry, who asked you to abandon the investigation and when?
The CEO asked whether we could abandon the investigation. In June 2020 of this year, or 2021 this year, there was an employment tribunal, and the non-executives and I were very anxious that, for good reason, that employment tribunal was settled, essentially because the club at a minimum knew that it had done some things that were wrong. And at that stage, the CEO made it clear that he would not and did not want to apologise to Azeem Rafiq.
Right. So it was personal.
I cannot say that. That's what he told me. At an early stage, I suggested that, as in fact one of the members did this morning, that Azeem Rafiq may well be part of the process of healing and reconciliation and help with driving the positive agenda going forward. And I was told that he wouldn't be welcome. So there were these isolated moments throughout the course of that investigation. The biggest issues came to my light after the report was produced in 17th of August of this year and beyond, when there was a clear resistance to see Azeem as the victim, a clear resistance to apologise, and as worryingly, a failure to look at the recommendations the panel had put forward and start executing them. So this would not happen again in the future.
Okay. So the 17th of August, that's when you became aware that effectively they wanted to sit on the report.
Well, there's not one defining moment. You're in a board and you're hoping to create change from within. But yes, I saw resistance, and the resistance accumulated.
Do you regret the fact that you didn't resign early? I mean, you obviously resigned obviously once this has come out. I know the fact that you contacted the committee to express the fact that you actually wanted to come here as chair and then resign. That circumstances didn't allow that. But you'd seen from Essex, for instance, where the N-word was used by one of the board members, and that case has come forward, and then Mr Stevenson, the chair, then said that if this is not dealt with and apologised for, I resign. Simple as that. Why didn't you take a similar action?
Well, I believed that the club's culture was stuck in the past. I think the club's culture needs changing. I didn't see that my resigning would be the way of changing that culture in August. I thought that my best way of changing it was trying to change it from within, until it became apparent that I was no longer able to do that.
Do you regret that choice now? Because clearly, just as an outside observer, if you had said in August, well, I tell you, this is absolutely out of order, you dinosaurs are holding this process up, and frankly, we need to put this out in the public domain, we need to apologise, we need to move forward, and we need to basically understand where the problem is. Do you regret the fact that you didn't, at that point, make a stand?
I don't actually. It would have been easier for me personally had I done so, and I wouldn't be being criticised for not having left earlier. But no, I believe trying to continue to make the change actually has made this more of an issue.
You mean by not just obviously not
by not capitulating
by screwing up to such an extent it's made it such an issue?
No, by not capitulating to those people who didn't want change to happen and to use this as an opportunity to move forward.
So you saw resigning at that point as capitulation rather than making a stand?
Yes.
Okay. The role of the previous chair in all this, as I understand it, he was making a bid to take back over control. I think I've heard the phrase take back control before, and he wanted to take back over effectively from his position. So what is your sort of view of his part in all this?
You referring to Mr Graves? One of my difficulties as chair is that I can't remove a director from the board without the consent of the Colin Graves Trust. And I spoke to those trustees on personal occasions and on a couple of meetings, and it was made clear to me that they were supportive of the people in the club that I felt were partly to blame for the negative.
Which people? Which people?
Some of the senior management.
So Arthurs and Moxon were supported by the Colin Graves Trust?
Yes.
Okay.
And some of the senior management, the head of HR.
Okay. So, as well as you wanted to remove HR? Is that fair?
I believe that there are a number of people in the organisation who ultimately affect the culture negatively.
Right, okay. Not quite clear enough there, I'm afraid, Mr Hutton.
Okay.
Who did you want to remove? And who, precisely, and what did the Colin Graves Trust say to you?
Okay, so I would have liked to remove Mark Arthur and ultimately Martin Moxon, not because of the conduct that is referred to in the report, but actually as a consequence of their failure to understand the gravity of the situation, the failure to apologise, and particularly for their failure to move on the recommendations that the panel have put forward. So for me, I would like to have removed those two people. It would never. I'm not an executive chairman. I also thought that actually the head of HR should also be removed.
Yeah, but they were individuals who sat on a bus hearing one of their players referred to as a P. Is that and then they did nothing about it? Surely that would be. I mean, frankly, I'd be staggered that if that was a situation that came to light when I was chair, that I wouldn't want to remove them for that reason, as well as them not understanding the PR around this whole shambles.
Yeah, I can only describe to you the reasons why I thought they should be removed from the club, because essentially they didn't realise the gravity of the situation, the changes that should be made, and that Azeem was a victim.
I'm interested in the Collingrave Trust. Basically, they have the money, because Yorkshire doesn't have any money, and Collingrave must have the money because of the big loan that was put in place. So basically, they're the money people. What they say goes. We have that bell for a moment. It does end, hopefully, in a second. There we go. As if by magic. But the Collingrave Trust, is this a pernicious element within Yorkshire? Because they have the keys to the castle. They've got the money. Yorkshire can't survive without the money from the Collingrave Trust, and yet here they are as a trust, preventing you as a new chair moving out, frankly, Moxon, Arthur, and the HR directors, who are people who, frankly, are bound to rights as far as this goes.
The club owes a substantial amount to the Collingrave Trust. I've not been involved in the history of the club. I imagine without that investment, the club would have been in terrible difficulties, and historically, the club would be indebted to the Collingrave Trust. I do think, on balance, it is wrong that a major creditor of that level has the keys to decisions that a board should or shouldn't make.
How does that change?
That's simply a negotiation between the club and the trust, or a refinancing of the debt.
Okay. Lord Patel, I can see you're in the audience today. Could you please step forward for us? Thank you. Thank you. I felt like a game show host there. Come on down, Lord Patel. But I'm sorry to bring you forward on this point. Okay. I know you can't talk about the investigation that's ongoing. We understand that as a committee. But Mr. Hutton has just made a really interesting point here about the fact that the Collingrave Trust has effectively a veto blocking on any moves that you do in terms of the board. How do you change that? How do you get this, quite frankly, failing outlook, if you like, of the Collingrave Trust that has prevented Mr. Hutton from dispensing with Mr. Moxon and Mr. Arthur? How do you get a grip on this?
I don't think for 1 second that I'd be sat there having gone through a proper process of any kind that's transparent and legal, for somebody to say to me, you can't do that, without giving me absolute concrete evidence on a legal basis or other why I can't as chair. And if that happened, I wouldn't accept it.
The option
and I would
is for you to
challenge
resign.
it.
That's the only option.
No, it's not for me to resign. It's to fight back and say.
I'm not asking you to resign.
No.
But you just got there. But what I'm saying to you is that the only option, the only nuclear option you would have when you have the Collingrave Trust, which has a financial interest in Yorkshire, basically holds the board in the palm of its hand. That seems to be a desperately unhealthy relationship.
Look, so I've only met one of the trustees on Zoom a couple of times. I've found the person to be very receptive, very reasonable, very understanding. That's just my experience of 2 Zoom meetings. My understanding is she, along with the other trustee, would be held to account for, maybe to a child that's not even been born in the trust, to say, you made a decision in 2021 which affected my finances 50 years on, and she can be personally sued. So I think they'll be very, very careful about the decisions they make. My position, if an individual is bringing the game or the club into dispute and the evidence is there, they go.
Would you have sacked Moxon and Arthur? Or would you have sacked the HR
if I was
director?
there at the time, and if the evidence was such, it's difficult for me to obviously look back in history, but it's not about Martin or Mark. It's anybody who's bringing that club into dispute in a way that has been clearly evident this morning. As chair, you have a responsibility, and I would have taken that responsibility. And just my initial 2 interactions with the person from the trust, they're completely independent. They're looking at the finances. They were looking at the way forward. They were making sure the finances are well guarded and looked after. And I think that's really important.
We'll ask you to stay in place if that's okay, but we do appreciate, I think all members do, that you can't talk about the current inquiry. Just finally, before we move on to Damien, Roger, why is it that you didn't sack any of the players who were involved in this racism?
The short answer is that I had no executive authority or responsibility in my role. If you're specifically talking about Gary Balance, which is the obvious person that is named in the report for using the P word, I wasn't involved in the investigation or the disciplinary piece. You will have seen the rather complex and convoluted description of the actions he took and the legal opinion in the report by the panel. In fact, by the panel. So I need to be clear: it was by the panel who made that point, where they concluded he had not racially harassed.
They basically suggested that calling on someone a Zimba is the same as calling someone a P. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, frankly, he just. I mean, that's such. I actually genuinely words fail me on that approach. I mean, why didn't words fail you? Why didn't you just say, well, basically, this is an employee of ours. They've used the P word to another employee, and they seem to have done it persistently. They need to go. I need to go now.
Well, as I say, I didn't have any executive role in this, but the reality is, you've seen one set of advice. That the club also took advice from lawyers, a different set of lawyers, who said that whilst there was a clear education and training need for Gary Balance, there was not a cause to bring disciplinary action against
him. And was
him.
Education and training put in place? Yes or no?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
You're chair.
There are many recommendations.
Just to remind you, were chair at the time.
Yes, I was. But there were a host of recommendations, and I don't know to the extent that it has or hasn't been put in place as yet. I don't know.
I mean, there's some sort of latitude to be had with the fact that you would obviously put in place in April 2020. But if this comes across your desk as a player calling another player a P, and they say about education and training, if that's the route that is recommended by the lawyers, I do find it staggering that you didn't follow through on that. At least, did you talk to Mox and North? Basically, was it so toxic in the Yorkshire boardroom that this sort of thing wasn't discussed?
It wasn't so toxic. Actually, it was hard to get them to do any of the things that you wanted to do. So from the 17th of August right the way through until Anna resigned, there were a series of board meetings where we repeatedly asked the executive to take steps. Hosts of emails and hosts of calls saying, please, can you do the following things? And they weren't done.
Okay. Damien Green?
Thank you. The fact that there is nobody from the executive, either past or present, here with us today, and what you're describing, that basically you've held board meetings and they just ignore you, and presumably there were other, if you like, forces of light on the board, makes me really worried about the future of the Yorkshire Cricket Club. Is there anyone working there who is capable of actually grasping this nettle?
Well, I have to say a couple of things, and it's I only started my role in COVID times, and actually I'd been to the club only a limited number of times. So when you see, by example, that letter signed by, in fact, it was about 13 people saying what they said in that letter, I actually haven't met most of those people. I literally wouldn't be able to recognise most of those people. So it's hard for me to evaluate the personalities of all the people there. But yeah, I mean, Lord Patel, I'm thrilled that he's there and has already started doing a great job. There are a couple of non-executives that have remained. The non-executives were very supportive of my position at the time. They can definitely bring change. I'm hopeful that change will be brought, but I think there are 2 or 3 things still for the club to do, and I think that they're really important. When I first started, I was concerned about the governance in the club, and actually I also created an independent investigation of the governance of the club. That was produced in June. There were some 40-odd recommendations that we needed to improve upon. I'm not clear that's been done. The culture is at the heart of the issue here for me. It's a culture that's stuck in the past, however you want to describe it. That's the most polite way you could describe it. That the CEO has resigned is fine, but that isn't going to change the culture of itself. And thirdly, there are an enormous number of really positive recommendations made by that panel that, as the date I resigned, there was no strategy to develop, and they also need to be developed. So I'm very hopeful and optimistic about the club, because actually I love it, despite what we're talking about today, that those things happen. But they do need to happen.
But one of the, and perhaps this is for Lord Patel, I mean, what we're hearing is that the chairman could be as well intentioned as possible, but actually it's really difficult to implement the decisions that clearly need to be taken. And I absolutely get the point. Changing the culture is not just a question of replacing the CEO. There is a huge stables to be cleaned out there. As chairman, do you feel you've got the power and authority to do that?
I suppose in all the roles I've had, I've been here before, and I think it's how you implement it. It's very difficult if you can't see people face to face, and Roger was right, it was in the pandemic. So I've begun every day to see individuals, and yes, this is about culture. There's no question about culture, and it's just not about Yorkshire, it's about other clubs, it's about cricket, it's a culture change. What I've seen is a combination of things. There's a combination, and I'm very early, days into my tenure, but just in terms of, feeling and talking to people, you see denial, absolutely. You see phenomenally hard-working people who, have given their lives to the club. You see people who are terrified, scared, they're in the headlights, mentally completely stressed for not just themselves but their families, their children. You see a lot of sadness, and I think we're all going to have to go on a journey to change that. I'm going to have to be very active chairman. I think I have to play a leadership role at the moment. We haven't got leadership there. I'm very lucky that somebody stood up to sort of help Paul Hudson to keep things going. But this is an organisation that's been hammered left, right, and centre, maybe for the right reasons. But there's individuals at the heart of it, and just like Azeem, the hurt that he's gone through, there's some people going through hurt as well. But changes are going to have to be made, and it's not going to be overnight, but by golly, we've got to move on it really quickly and hard. And I'm prepared to take whatever decisions I need to take to move this forward, because there's too many people in that chain, too many young people who are suffering at the moment, and staff who are suffering.
Yeah. And one of the things that I just find puzzling, I find it deeply puzzling how anyone can be a cricket lover and a racist. You only have to love the game and look around the world and think, it is obvious skills are sort of shared and distributed fairly, as it were, or possibly unfairly. But one of the things that we've heard this morning that I found most odd from a sporting point of view, from the point of view of a sporting club who in the end get measured by sporting success, was to say, pick a few of those Asian players, but not too many of them. Surely you pick your best players. And I mean, is that a fair representation of what went on at Yorkshire in the past? And B, did you know about that when you became chairman?
I'm embarrassed. I didn't know that. I've never heard that. I wasn't there during any of that period. And that is really for those there to answer at the time. I just can't assist with that. I personally have never seen or heard anyone say that in my short tenure. So. But I mean, all the stats we've been quoting all morning, you look at it and you think, whatever. Goodness gracious, you have got all these Asian heritage players in Yorkshire, all very, very good up to the age of 16. None of them, literally none of them, in the Yorkshire team. I totally agree. I'm obviously a cricket lover. I'm at heart a cricket fan, and when you drive through the streets of Leeds and Bradford, actually what you see in the parks is mostly people from a South Asian background playing cricket, and that they don't end up in the cricket club being stars for Yorkshire County Cricket Club is ridiculous.
And I'm fascinated. Around the boardroom, has nobody ever said, we could do better?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. In the short time that I've been there is an equality, diversity, and inclusion committee for this. There were a number of initiatives that were put forward to improve this, and actually the club recruited an equality, diversity and inclusion manager in March this year. So there were positive steps being taken. So everyone understood that this is what the club needed to change, and it needed to develop and improve its accessibility and its reach. And actually, probably most importantly, that the South Asian community wanted to be at Yorkshire and felt at home at Yorkshire, which is clearly, so sadly, what we hear from Azeem today is that he doesn't want his children even to play cricket.
Yeah, that's I agree.
That's the terrible punchline.
And if that's reflected more widely, then that's tragic on all sorts of levels. A final question to Lord Patel is one of the bits of culture that you think you need to change, that senior players, sort of England players, you know, the big names in the dressing room, they mustn't be allowed to set the culture, because that's one of the ways we've heard this morning it can get toxic. Do you draw that lesson from what we've heard?
I think they need to be. They're not just players. They're part of the solution. They're a key part of the solution. They need to be on that journey with us. They need to learn with us. You know, and Azeem said in his own words, you know, you get in there 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you grow, you watch your heroes, and you emulate what they're doing. And I think they need to come round the table now. So it's not just about the captain or the 2 senior players. It's about all the players having a say. You know, we talk about, in my world, in the health service, talking about service users and patients. Do we really do it? Is it, you know, do we consult? Do we talk to them? Or do we actually listen and work with them? And, you know, I'm a social worker, so that's what I bring. You know, I want to take those skills and say, be honest and truthful. Did it work? And I think that, you know, the question you made earlier about women, it's terrible. I can't believe I've sat in cricket clubs all around the place. You wouldn't let anybody talk about your mother or your sister like that. But it's acceptable. It's been done for years. I think we just have, you know, there is an education and awareness process. I struggle with the idea that a 2-day education course that you're forced to go on is going to change anything. I struggle with the idea, and I've been there and done it, of employing an equality manager, because it's his or her issue, problem. It shouldn't sit in HR, it shouldn't sit there. It should sit with the chair and the chief exec. And if we don't lead it and believe in it, then you're going to hide into nothing.
Thank you. Alex Davis-Jones.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to both our witnesses this afternoon. Roger, were you aware of issues with racism at the club before you took the post?
No, not at all.
No, it'd never been.
Oh. Well, I suppose I've read the press. I wasn't aware of specific allegations of racism, but I knew that the club had a history where the question kept being asked, because I'm a fan of the club, so I wasn't blind to questions that had been raised in the press in the past.
And when you took the post, being aware of wider issues in the club, was it something that you made a priority in terms of looking at to tackle?
To be candid with you, my first desire was to improve the culture at the club more broadly, rather than being in relation to discrimination specifically.
Okay. And how did you go about that?
Well, it's simply trying to engage with the senior executive and begin to understand them and how the club may change. Actually, I literally had probably only been involved in 2 Zoom meetings, 3 Zoom meetings from my date of appointment till when the Azeem press statement was made.
Right.
And so when the Azeem press statement was brought to my attention, which was late August, I spoke to one of the non-executives and we saw it as a brilliant opportunity.
Okay. How far does sporting success drown out disquiet about individuals at Yorkshire Cricket Club?
Well, certainly in my tenure, sadly, and in the last 5 or 6 years, Yorkshire hasn't had much sporting success. So I don't think it has drowned it out in reality. And as I tried to answer a question earlier, actually, the more South Asian players you can get into the side, the more talent you're introducing, the more successful you're likely to be. So I don't think, the reality is, I don't think sporting success impacts the club's attitude to racism. If it did, it should only encourage it to be more engaging and accessible.
And we've heard about some of the ways in which disciplinary action was taken at the club or not taken because of other issues. But do senior players or the star players get leeway or preferential treatment when it comes to any allegations made towards them or any issues in their behaviour? Are they treated differently?
I've not witnessed or seen that, so I can't help with that question. I'm sorry.
Okay. Is it more difficult then to discipline senior players because of the high profile that they receive in the media and with fans?
I wouldn't say so.
Okay.
In my experience at Yorkshire, I wouldn't say so.
Okay. If I bring you now to the report and to the inquiry, which we've discussed already today,
yes.
Did the findings of the inquiry surprise you?
Yes.
And what was your first reaction on seeing that senior players were involved in this discriminatory behaviour?
I was shocked. I was shocked and surprised.
Did you think that publishing just a summary of the report would satisfy those interested in what was actually happening at the club?
I recognised that were limitations in only publishing the summary of that report.
Okay, and in recognising those limitations, with the hindsight you've got now, what would you have done differently?
On the subject of publication, it's a very important question, which is the right to bring. There are a number of complexities you will have seen on the report itself. There's a very strong warning about the confidentiality of that report, and that without the participants, many of whom are employees of the club, agreeing to waive those rights, you can't publish. After the investigation was started, there was then subsequently brought an employment tribunal in December 2020, which also complicated the issue, and the strong advice from the barristers at that stage was again that you could not publish that report. So sadly we could not, under legal advice, publish the contents of the report in the way that we might have liked.
I'd like to ask you now about some of the most harrowing testimony we heard this morning from Mr. Rafiq around the way he was treated following the loss of his son. Are you aware of a bereavement leave policy or a personal circumstances support at the club for players and staff?
I believe there is a policy, yes.
There is a policy in place, and you're aware of what that is? And
not in detail, I'm not, no.
Right, okay. And are players supported with mental health? We heard some of the testimony around some of the Muslim players at the club, how they were treated when they were fasting. Is that taken into account, and does the club have a policy to support that?
There are mental health policies. I'm aware of one player having had support over the period when I was a chairman. I'm not aware in more detail of anybody else than the one player I know having had support.
Okay. And what was the feedback of that, if you've received any?
I haven't received it.
Okay. Lord Patel, probably a question for you now. A number of players, since Mr. Rafiq has spoken out, have also come forward with their own experiences of racism at the club. Do you have plans to reach out to these players and speak to them about what they too have experienced, and what steps are there in place to support current and former players at the club?
So I think my initial process has been to set up a completely independent, we call it a hotline, but it's a place where people can go with confidence that the issue will be looked at very carefully, triaged and then taken forward, and I think that's really important. That I think the whole process has encouraged people to come forward. If I would rather that than, forgive me, to go to the media, where it's trial by media as opposed to a proper process in place. I've reached out to lots of people who've sent me a message where I think it's appropriate for me as chair to talk to them. Now we've got the hotline set up within literally days. I think it's more appropriate that it goes through a process. It's seen to be going through a process. It's not Yorkshire dealing with it, it's independent. And we take that challenge and then take it forward.
How many, are you aware of how many calls you've had to the hotline since it's been set up?
Literally, I mean, I think it's gone live today, so I literally don't know. I mean, we in 3 or 4 days, we've talked to the more senior barrister who's leading this. We've set up the structures for it. We've asked him to write the terms of reference. We're not dictating, and I would imagine there's going to be a number of calls. And look, people may still feel, Yorkshire set this up, I can't do this, I want to have a phone call and have a discussion. We will do everything possible to enable those discussions to be had, even if it means me personally going out. But I want to try and keep it independent. I've got a role, and I think things have to be investigated properly.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask you, Mr. Hutton, were you surprised in any way in the way that the report into the inquiry was written?
I've no experience of receiving a report like this before. I didn't actually know what I was likely to receive. I ultimately was surprised that there was, as it were, differing views from the investigation team, the international law firm, and the conclusions of the panel, which to some extent was unhelpful.
So it was counts in terms that were so defamatory it couldn't be published. Was that helpful to Yorkshire Cricket Club?
No, it was very unhelpful to Yorkshire Cricket Club because the investigation team had, by and large, I think, tried to write a report that anonymised the issue so far as they were able. The panel conclusions were much more explicit, and therefore it made it more complicated to publish.
But do you not think, maybe this is something with hindsight, but do you not think that if it had been possible to produce a report that could have been published, that it would have helped the situation, we wouldn't be where we are now?
Yes, I definitely agree that it would be more helpful. There are a number of problems with Yorkshire County Cricket Club handling this report, and one of them is because it's essentially dealing with its own employees in the situation. So there's a general defamation point, but actually there's a different point that a number of your employees have volunteered to participate into this investigation and have rights associated with that. And unless they waive their rights, then you're in a situation where you can't, as an employer, you can't, it's much harder to publish.
So, you mentioned employees being involved in the inquiry. Did it alarm you that so many people refused to give evidence to the inquiry?
Yes, I don't know how many did refuse, but because I have no visibility on the investigation process, I've not seen the evidence other than Azeem's statement, and I don't know exactly who didn't. I know certain people clearly didn't, but I don't know how many others didn't come forward. I mean, people did come forward. Tino Best and many others did come forward. But yes, one of the difficulties with with the club commissioning the report is that we can't compel anyone to come forward because it's a voluntary process.
I mean, are you satisfied with the inquiry? I mean, do you think it lifted up the rocks or just said there's a rock over there?
Am I satisfied with that? I'm glad we did it. I think actually it has shone the sunlight on Yorkshire County Cricket Club's culture. I don't agree with all its findings, and the process was to some extent flawed, but I'm still glad that we carried out the investigation.
Yeah, so what's your association before you became chair of Yorkshire Cricket Club? Are you a long-term fan?
Long-term fan from when I was 7 years old, yeah. I was a long-term fan. I hadn't served on the board before I came straight in from not being a board member to being chair.
So what does the Fletcher report mean to you?
It doesn't.
It doesn't?
No.
It was a report to Yorkshire Cricket Club in 2014 into racism in the club. It had quite significant findings. Not a reference point for you when you became chair.
I wasn't aware of it.
Can I ask you, Mr. Patel, what do you know of the Fletcher report?
Well, I know it's a fairly stark, damning report. And there's lots of issues in there that clearly haven't been addressed over the years. And I think we'll be going back over lots of reports that present various bits of evidence. My personal position is we need to take stock, we need to listen, we need to go on a journey, and it's very difficult. And how can I relate it? I mean, my wife was born under apartheid in South Africa. People, I have relatives there. My mum was born there. We have, the day Mandela took over, you could have had a bloodbath, and people would have said, that's justice. The fact that some people could sit around the table with somebody who bullwhipped them the day before and work a way forward takes humanity to a different level. I mean, could I do that? I don't know. But I know that I need to take people with me, and people need to learn for themselves. I mean, it's pointless me going in there as chair saying, if you don't do this and you believe this, then you're out the door. Or people say, no, we do, and they don't own it. Ownership is crucial, and the journey is crucial. And, Azeem said in his own testament, I don't think half the time it was water for ducks back, because that was what happens every day. And, you and I and everybody here knows that happens every day in lots of environments, and we as a society have put up with it too long. It pains me that this is prevalent in cricket, and it really does. Cricket gave me an escape in life that was tough. I wish other children could have that opportunity as well. And it's up to us, and it's I play my part in that to look at all the history, look at all the reports, but actually now work out a very practical, action-orientated way forward. And that's going to be tough. But as Azeem has said, with politicians being involved, and you represent people, and and that's it's not about MPs, it's about your constituents have said we're not having this, and I think we have to follow suit to do that. Sorry, long-winded answer to your question.
Thank you for your answer. But Mr. Hutton, but just shortly after you became chair, the murder of George Floyd occurred, and we had the Black Lives Matter movement. What was the response of Yorkshire Cricket Club to what was happening through sport in response to that?
There was no immediate response to that. The reality was that the players debated amongst themselves what stance they should take in relation to that, and wore a logo, I believe, on their shirts at the time. The real response, I think, the opportunity was when Azeem, really only half a dozen weeks later than the George Floyd death, made his statement, and that was our opportunity to get to grips with the situation and develop change. That was the moment I saw the opportunity.
So, I mean, there was a lot going on in sport in response to Black Lives Matter, and it's not the Black Lives Matter, the movement, it is the upsurge of, upswell of public opinion and concern. And would you say that Yorkshire Cricket Club was an outlier and didn't respond like other people, like other organisations?
I wouldn't say that publicly. No, I wouldn't have that view of what they did. In reality, no, I wouldn't say that.
So what was done? I mean, you allowed the players to have a discussion, but from board level down, was there anything that was instigated?
So there were three things going on. The players wore anti-discrimination logos. I can't remember what the wording was. You may have it. We had an EDI committee trying to create and develop change. We knew how important that engagement and diversity and equity was. We had an ongoing plan to develop that, and in essence, that was our reaction to the tragedy that happened in the United States.
Last question. Where do you think we would be now if this committee hadn't intervened and insisted on hearing evidence and calling for the report to be handed over?
I'm not very clear, actually. I mean, Lord Patel has made some great steps forward, I'm thrilled at that. I do wonder whether, in fact, that the input of this committee has resulted in that being a situation that there was no reflection of Lord Patel, who's doing a great job, but whether or not he would have had the support and the ability to deliver what he started to deliver without your involvement. So I do worry if you hadn't got involved, what would have happened.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Could you, Mr. Hutton, shed any light on a question I asked Mr. Rafiq earlier on about when the report was originally commissioned? Its terms of reference were that those writing the report would basically have two things that they would do. The second of which would be to make a finding as to whether Yorkshire Cricket Club was institutionally racist. And that was the original term of reference in September 2020, I believe. And then whilst you were chair of the club in April, I believe, of this year, that was changed. And they were no longer to report to the panel on the issue of whether or not Yorkshire Cricket Club was institutionally racist. Can you shed any light on that?
Yes, I hope I can. That when the original scope was set out and agreed with those people representing Azeem Rafiq, there were two issues that the investigation team were going to look at and the panel were going to report on. They were the specific many allegations from Azeem, and secondly, the extent to which Yorkshire County Cricket Club was institutionally racist. And so the actual question posed never changed, unbeknown to me, and I don't know when or how or at what stage. The panel asked the investigation team not to make findings on the second question.
I can tell you when it was. I'm surprised you don't know. It was on the 16th of April, 2021, as it says in the report.
Okay, thank you. Well, they didn't do that with my knowledge, and the panel, I can only assume, because I had no input into the process at all, stood completely back from the process. The panel must have concluded that it wanted to make the finding on whether the club was institutionally racist rather than the investigation team or not.
Could you speculate at all? I mean, you were obviously, maybe it was appropriate, I don't know, that you weren't informed or touched about this change. I would have thought it would have been appropriate, but can you speculate at all as to why the panel suddenly, what are we, 7 or 8 months into the inquiry, suddenly decide that the terms of reference that they'd set, asking for the people conducting the investigation to make a judgment on whether the club is institutionally racist, is something they didn't want them to make because they wanted to have control over whether that conclusion was drawn. But why would they have done that?
I have no answer. I'm sorry, I do not know why they did that.
Do you? Lord Patel, obviously you weren't involved at this stage. Have you got any thoughts on that?
If I was chair of an organisation and I set an inquiry with clear terms of reference, which I would expect myself and the board to agree, if for some reason those terms of reference were changed halfway through, I would want an immediate board meeting to discuss why those terms of reference have been changed.
And in the inquiry you set up, I think you told the committee that, in fact, the terms of reference would be set by
the independent QC was looking at this.
Sorry, Mr. Hutton.
That's what happened. So I took no part. So I set off the investigation team and the independent panel to answer 2 questions. One is about the allegations of Azeem Rafiq, and the second is about whether Yorkshire is institutionally racist, which is a massive question.
But the panel, at some point, decided they didn't want the investigating team to answer the second.
They wanted to answer it themselves.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
they did.
Well,
but I didn't know about that.
Well, and you didn't know that. Well, we all wonder why, don't we? Mr. Hutton, is Yorkshire Cricket Club institutionally racist?
Well, the report concluded there was insufficient evidence. The panel concluded that there was insufficient evidence. I have to observe that in the last few months there's been a substantial amount of thoughtlessness and ignorance, a reluctance to apologise, a reluctance to see Azeem as the victim, and a reluctance to put into place the recommendations, which I think are really important in this process.
That sounds to me like you're edging towards the word yes in answer to my question. Would that be fair?
I think the question remains unanswered.
My question is to you rather than what happened in the report.
Okay. So
in your view, you were chair for 18 months,
yes,
and you'd resigned.
I fear, yes. Sorry, I shouldn't speak across you. Yes, I fear that it falls within that definition.
Right. Thank you. And Lord Patel, how does it feel to be the chair of an organisation that's institutionally racist, according to its previous chair?
That's a very interesting question, and
that's why I asked
almost yeah. I suppose that almost suggests, that organisations I've chaired in the past, or other people have chaired in the past, are not institutional racists, and there's an issue. I've been appointed because there's a charge of institutional racism, and clearly the processes, systems, the systemic nature of what's been going on, as we've witnessed in many organisations, feels to be there. My job is to work as hard as I can with people to change that process. I have to be proud of the organisation I'm chairing. There's no question about that.
Okay.
I have to lead it into the right direction.
Just to wrap this up a little bit, Mr. Hutton, has the ECB, who are also going to give evidence, done enough to combat racism?
No, for me, at the outset, when I spoke to the chair of the ECB on the 4th of September, I always felt that the ECB should be carrying out this investigation. I don't really want me to talk about that in answer to this particular question, but I think that the ECB should have carried out this investigation. I think the investigation would have been far better had they done that, for some obvious reasons. I think it was right that they should have done it. I mean, Yorkshire, this was a whistle-blowing claim against Yorkshire County Cricket Club extending from 2007 to 2018 against the executive of the club, and yet their response was to believe that Yorkshire should handle that when the claims were even against the executive in place at the time. And for me, that seemed wrong. It also seemed wrong to me because I believed and said at the time in that conversation that I thought this was a game-wide issue. And Yorkshire is a very prominent part of brand cricket, and I felt the ECB should have investigated at that time, and I believe they could have investigated at that time. Had they done, the questions that Yorkshire's struggling to answer this morning about independence would not have existed. The questions that I'm struggling to answer this morning about participation and getting people to participate wouldn't have existed. I think publication would also have been easier if the ECB had done that. So I think they should have recognised this was an issue they should have got involved in. I've heard they've said that they're a regulatory body. Azeem didn't actually approach Yorkshire in relation to this issue. He made some public statements in the press. Actually, because probably, to be fair, and you've heard him well this morning, he had no confidence in Yorkshire at that stage. He thought it was institutionally racist. And in my view, that the ECB did have the discretion to start investigating at that stage. Actually, I think the regulations do allow them to do that, and any member of the ECB could have started the complaint, as indeed they've just done with Essex at the moment. So I think they could have investigated. I think they should have investigated, and I think the investigation would have been far more satisfactory if they'd done.
Thanks very much. Just finally, Lord Patel, you heard Mr. Rafiq's evidence earlier on. Do you know what White Rose values means, and do you have White Rose values?
I've been living in Yorkshire all my life. For me, it's about, I suppose, White Rose values is, straightforwardness, bluntness sometimes, being honest, transparent, having pride in being a Yorkshireman, and working with people. I mean, the old joke, if you come to London and say hello to somebody, it's an offence. It sort of sums up, that's what you'd expect.
Racism should be no part of that as well.
Racism shouldn't be a part of any values anywhere across the world.
Chair.
Right.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Hello, gentlemen. Thank you for your time. I don't want to detain you long. I just wanted to ask you, Mr. Hutton. So, Premier League chairmen get together monthly, don't they? They have a monthly meeting. Presumably, county club chairmen do the same. Is that right?
Exactly right.
So, Mr. Rafiq earlier, in answer to me, named a few other counties, didn't he? Leicestershire had been named a couple of times in his interesting evidence. I just wonder whether you would care to comment on the wider county game, whether Yorkshire has just been unlucky in being at the centre of this storm, could have been any one of the others. Whether your thoughts on that, please.
Well, I don't think if you've conducted acts of racism, you're unlucky. So I don't think Yorkshire...
Are you unlucky to get caught?
No, I think Azeem was very brave, and it's shone some sunlight on a massively important subject. But yes, it is, in answer to your question, it is quite clear from me speaking to other chairs generally that they believe this is a game-wide issue, right, and they believe it's an issue that should be dealt with on a game-wide basis. Okay. And I personally, in fact, I was invited to speak on the subject by Mr. Watmore at one meeting of those chairs, and I was quite vociferous in the fact that actually this is a game-wide issue and needs addressing by the ECB in one form or another.
You see, you could say Yorkshire are unlucky in having Mr. Rafiq to speak out. Actually, I think you're quite lucky, because I think it's giving you an opportunity to, as a club, to wipe the slate clean. The other clubs, maybe, when we talked about it, didn't we, with him, maybe have players who are at the earlier stage of this journey, still thinking it's just bullying, maybe it's just them. I just wonder whether you would care to name any other conversations that you've had with chairmen where they feel that this is coming down the track for them next.
I don't think it's right for me, because I've only got anecdotal conversation from them, but there are a series of chairmen who I think want to work more proactively to deal with the situation, for the very reason that Lord Patel said, I've said, and this committee is here.
Just finally, are there any others that are on the edge? I mean, you walked away because you weren't happy, and I think I saw you on the news being followed by the vultures, saying that you've resigned from the job you love. Are there any others that were on the brink, do you think?
I don't know that.
Right.
I don't know that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. And one final question from Giles Watling.
Yes, following on from Steve Brown, really, and I'm sure you'll agree that what we've heard this morning is an absolute travesty. A young man who had his dreams shattered by institutional racism, bullying and abuse. Are senior figures at the club aware of the unique position that they're now in to Phoenix-like do something about it? Now, the point I'm trying to make, and I think this really goes to you, Lord Patel, is that given that this has happened, given that it's been brought into the open, wouldn't it be wonderful if this could be a defining moment and bringing this racist, laddish, misogynistic behaviour finally to book, with the great club of Yorkshire leading the way?
I mean, I think you really articulated what I'm thinking. And this is, people use this glibly, this is a watershed moment. So for me, this is, the last two people I remember where I was involved in anything was Stephen Lawrence. He lost his life, and that was a watershed moment in terms of changing something. My direct involvement with David Rocky Bennett, who, died in a prone position with 6 nurses sitting on him until he died as a result of racism, and then my subsequent involvement in developing the strategy to help that. But they both died. This young man's, thankfully hasn't. Who couldn't be moved by what he said? Racist or non-racist, if you're human, who could not be moved by that? There is, as Mr. Bryan has said, a moment in time where we can rise from the ashes if we want to do it that
Absolutely.
way. We can
I
have a
think what I'm
slate.
asking you, Lord Patel, is do you have plans
Absolutely
to make this happen?
I want to make this the best county cricket club in the world, not just for cricket, but actually for having the right culture and having the right values going forward. And absolutely, I would like to be the template that goes forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That concludes our second panel. Lord Patel, Roger Hutton, thank you very much for your evidence today. We're going to take a very, very short adjournment, 2 minutes, I promise, while we set up our final panel. Order, order. Order, order. This is the Digital Culture Media Support Select Committee. It's our third panel today on racism in Yorkshire. We're joined by Tom Harrison, Chief Executive of the ECB, and by three other representatives from the ECB, Kate Miller, Mina Botros and Alan Dickinson. Thank you very much for joining us today, Tom, Kate, Mina and Alan. Tom, you heard what Mr Hutton said in terms of the ECB stepping away from this process. Why is it you let Yorkshire deal with this? They were clearly either incompetent or, frankly, they didn't want to deal with it in any sort of way. So why didn't you step up to the plate and deal with this?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Can I just say, firstly, we've obviously sat and listened to Azeem Rafiq's testimony this morning, and I think we've all been pretty moved by it, to say the least. I think it's brought forward a lot of emotions, and I'm sure that the panel share that. So I just wanted to commend Azeem's bravery. And we have Alan here from the board, representative of the board, who will also just like to read a short statement, if that's all right.
No, it's not all right, I'm afraid. Okay. Mr Harrison, we've got limited time. Could you please answer the question?
Sure. Look, the reason why we didn't step into this investigation right at the start is because of the complex role that the ECB plays in relation to being national governing body, and we've sent the panel a sheet of that explaining that role. We are the national governing body, we are the promoter, we are also the regulator, and on regulatory matters it is normal practice for first-class counties to take on investigations that they want to take on at their will. It is then for the regulator, in other words the ECB, to sit in judgment of that investigation and, if need be, run an additional investigation on top On this occasion, and I'll pass to Mr. Botros, who is our head of legal and integrity, was intensely involved in the negotiations at the time. Yorkshire were very clear that they wanted to run this investigation themselves. There was an offer put to the ECB about whether we wanted to partner.
So just to clarify there, so who was it at Yorkshire that said to the ECB that they wanted themselves to deal with this investigation? Can you name the names, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you.
It was the chair of Yorkshire, Mr. Hutton, who stated that he wanted the international law firm to carry out this investigation. And
so he's just lied to us? He's just lied to us, is that right?
The question that was put to the ECB was, would you want to put someone from the ECB on the panel that would come to the conclusions on the findings? And the ECB said that, given it's a Yorkshire investigation, it would not be appropriate to have an ECB person on the panel coming to the findings, because we have a role to play as a regulator and we will be carrying out our own investigation. And if Yorkshire will be carrying out that investigation first, then that needs to conclude.
So sorry, just to cut you. He did ask you to put someone on the panel of the investigation, but they were when they said that they wanted you to investigate, was he truthful or was he untruthful?
To my knowledge, Mr. Hutton asked us to put someone on the panel in relation to the investigation that Yorkshire were carrying out.
Yes, but the question is very simple. When he stated to this committee in the last session that he had asked you to take on the investigation, it's very different to whether or not you sit on a panel or not. What is the truth?
Sorry, it may be that Mr. Watmore had discussions as the chair at the time on that basis, but I can tell you that when it came to our regulatory department and in terms of the role that we were asked to play, it was very clearly, do we or do we not want to partner on the investigation with Yorkshire County Cricket Club? At that point, we took the very clear decision that we would not partner with Yorkshire. We would wait for them to carry out their investigation and then take steps post the investigation.
Because that was the interpretation. We'd had discussions over this matter ourselves, offline, so to speak, and that was what I was told by your organisation. So I'm a little bit perplexed precisely where partnering actually means taking on the investigation. What I'd like you to do, please, is I would like to supply to this committee all correspondence in relation to that decision as to whether or not it would be Yorkshire whether or not it was Yorkshire who requested that they take the lead with this inquiry, that it was a Yorkshire inquiry, and whether or not actually it was them requesting just a member, you to supply a panel member. Would you be able to do that?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Because I have to say, pretty extraordinary if that is the line which has been taken with us today, if that is proven to have not been true in that respect. So that's pretty extraordinary. So why is it different for Essex?
Again, I think we've all learnt some very key lessons from this experience, and indeed the mishandling of this investigation. Reforming our governance process, reforming our regulatory process happen all the time, right? We're always trying to get better, and we're always trying to be more thorough and better at how we do.
So what you're saying then, Mr. Harrison, is effectively you decided that you would go by the rules when it comes to Yorkshire, but with Essex, because of some bad publicity, you basically wouldn't go by the rules. You'd short-circuit that, despite the fact that we know from the Fletcher report that Yorkshire has a long history of basically not involving other communities and, frankly, racism.
No, I don't think that is a fair characterisation of the
What
situation.
is a fair characterisation, and why Essex and not Yorkshire?
Nina, would you like to just explain it from your perspective?
Yes, thank you. So in relation to Essex, we started our regulatory investigation at a time when Essex were not conducting an investigation, so there was no investigation to wait for. With Yorkshire, as we just set out, there was a desire from Yorkshire to carry out this investigation led by the international law firm, as you're aware, and we were told that would be...
Are they a law to themselves, effectively Yorkshire, in the regulatory system? Because it seems to be as if, frankly, that they had a free pass on this until they screwed up. Whereas Essex, because they haven't launched the investigation, because basically they were in communication with you throughout the entire process, as I well know, they then basically are allowed, then basically you come in and you circumnavigate it, you short-circuit it and carry out your role as a regulator. It seems to me as if Yorkshire was too big to be pulled up about things like this. Is that fair?
If I may, in relation to Yorkshire, what happened was we were told that they wished to investigate this. They were going to commission an independent international law firm to carry this out, that it would be completed within 3 months.
A law firm that Mr. Hutton used to work for?
Yes, and that the findings would be published, and that they committed to carrying out the recommendations from that. So based on those commitments from Yorkshire...
Neither of which they did.
Correct, and the unacceptable way that it has been handled is a big problem here. But in September 2020, when we were given those commitments, we therefore stated that we will not start our regulatory investigation until that period had concluded and they had come to the findings. But we were clear that we would then be conducting our investigation regardless of that. With Essex, when I became aware of the allegations that have been made, we then immediately started our regulatory process. There was no correspondence with Essex.
Will you do this every time in the future? Because this, it's just extraordinary that Yorkshire were allowed to effectively construct a report which was never meant for the light of day because it was so messed up. And I actually argue probably deliberately so. And then effectively that means that they almost could get away with, frankly, burying Mr. Rafiq's quite telling, pertinent and quite obviously true evidence in many instances. Yeah. Why is it that the game allows a club, no matter how big, to effectively behave in that fashion? Your role as a regulator, surely from this moment onwards, should ensure that no club ever again performs in the way in which Yorkshire has performed over this.
Well, I completely agree with that sentiment, Chair, and I would just add the following, that the reason why Yorkshire were allowed to undergo this investigation is because up to that point it was fairly normal practice for first-class counties to run their own regulatory process, and then for ECB as the regulator of the entire game to effectively sit in judgment of that investigation done internally. We have learnt lessons through this process, and the thing obviously that is incredibly hurtful is not only the fact that it has been handled so badly, but indeed the fact that it's taken so long for the investigation to be published, indeed sent to the ECB even, which took months for us to get copies of it. So we've got a litany of issues to deal with that will help inform our regulatory processes going forward.
Okay. David Green?
Just one point about the overall process, and thank you for the helpful document. The ECB's basic role is to promote the game, including the county game. One of its other roles is to regulate the game. In a situation like this, where you have an inquiry that basically is trying to hide, as it were, not to look under the stones enough, isn't there an inherent conflict of interest in that? Shouldn't the regulatory function be in a different body than the promotional function? Because it's perfectly clear that in instances like this, they conflict. It's more difficult to sell cricket now than it was a couple of months ago because of this.
You rightly point out that there is a complex role there, both playing national governing body, promoter, as well as regulator. I think it brings some significant advantages to us as a sport as well, to have everything under one roof. Indeed, and that includes dealing with government and operating as a single sport, singing with one voice. And we do have processes which keep the independence of the regulatory operation in place. But Mina, perhaps you can give a little bit more perspective on that, and how it works.
Absolutely. You're right that there is that conflict, or at least potential conflict, depending on the circumstances, and the ECB recognises that, and the ECB's put in place structures to deal with that issue. So in relation to regulatory matters, there is a regulatory committee which is chaired by an independent chair and independent individuals on there with relevant experience, and they oversee regulatory process, including cases such as this and the prosecution of cases, so that there is that separation between the regulatory arm and the promoter, as you state, and they hold the ECB to account in carrying out that role.
Sorry, who holds the ECB to account?
The Independent Regulatory Committee.
Who appoints the Independent Regulatory Committee?
The ECB. They are chaired by an independent individual, and they have independents on there who make decisions in relation to cases.
Yeah. I would make the fair observation at the moment that maybe Parliament isn't the institution best equipped to advise people on how to regulate themselves. But nevertheless, I can only suggest you have a look at that. I mean, an independent panel that you appoint that then holds you to account seems a bit circular, to put it as politely as I can. I think that this might be a structural weakness in the process.
I think we've discovered quite a few today. Julia.
Yeah, it sounds a bit like the Wild West, this to me, to be honest. I mean, do you think that's appropriate that you appoint the committee who actually is supposed to be independent of you?
We rely on the independence of those individuals.
No, do you think it's appropriate?
That is the structure we have in place in order for the...
Do you think that's an appropriate system?
I believe that it works and that the ECB is carrying out that role.
So you've got no idea whether it's appropriate. Do you think it's an appropriate system?
Well, I think in the absence of a better system, it works. And look, if you look at the personnel on our independent regulatory committee,
that is not really the issue.
Right.
To me, it does not sound like an appropriate system. In fact, it sounds like an absolute system that is open to abuse. But you cannot answer the question. It's appalling. So you said earlier that you knew that Mr. Hutton used to work for this independent international law firm that was doing the inquiry into what was going on in Yorkshire. Did you know that before the investigation started or afterwards?
So we were informed in early September that Mr. Hutton would be using that law firm. I wasn't aware of that before it came to light. I don't recall at which point exactly I was aware of that, but it was Yorkshire who were going to be appointing that firm.
So at the point that you became aware of it, did you at any point question that might not be an appropriate company to do that?
We were conscious of our role in that we were going to be carrying out a regulatory process in relation to this, both in terms of the allegations but also Yorkshire's handling of the matter, and therefore it was not appropriate for us to input into how they carried out that investigation. So we didn't want to therefore tell them who to have on their panels, for example.
No, but it's not about telling them who to have on the panel. It's about saying to them, as a critical friend, I would suggest that it would not look right having a company that the person, Mr. Hutton, used to work for, running this inquiry. At no point did you think that was a sensible thing to put forward.
I agree with the point you're making. It's not, as you put it, a good look. However, we've got to be conscious that we can't take small steps in intervening in that process because we have to respect.
But it wouldn't be intervening, would it? It would just be simply saying this would not look good. Mr. Harrison, did you not think of suggesting that?
Well, as I said, the ECB has to be independent of the. If we're going to be overlooking and sitting in judgment of a process, and we are prepared to make an intervention into one part of the process but not another, but I don't think that is an independent regulator.
It's not really an intervention. It's a passing comment. Have you actually, to say to somebody, have you thought about how this looks? That isn't really intervening.
Well, I can't confirm that there weren't offline comments made to that. I certainly didn't raise it. It is, as Chief Executive, did not raise it. The regulatory function needs to sit outside the operational function for obvious reasons, and some of those have been raised already. But we need to make sure that when we are able to sit in judgment of an investigation, it is having been independent all the way through the process.
So you said, I can't remember which one of you said, but one of you said that it was normal practice, I think it was you, Mr. Harrison, actually, that clubs carry out their own investigations. And yet it wasn't normal practice for Essex to carry out their own investigation.
No, that's... Lena, do you want to explain that?
My understanding is that Essex will be carrying out an investigation now. My point was that at the time we started our regulatory investigation, and this was prior to it coming into the public domain last week, prior to the resignation that was covered last week in the media, there wasn't an Essex investigation. So the standard practice is that if there is one, we will wait for that to conclude. If there isn't one, then we will commence straight away.
So at the very least, as an outsider, and I'm not a cricket person, but looking at this, it's very cloudy. And as I say, you could describe this as the Wild West, the way this is what we've heard this morning. Do you think the ECB is fit for purpose?
Yes, I do. I think we are learning a lesson here about...
And what lesson are you learning, Mr. Harrison?
Well, I think we've got a long way to go to fulfil our ambition to make cricket a game for everyone. That is something that ever since I have done this job, I've tried to ensure that the game is providing opportunities to more people from more different backgrounds to come and take part in this game. And
you get funding from the EHRC to address equalities issues. How are you using that money? What are you actually doing to address those issues?
Kate, can I pass to you to take on some of this?
Yeah, we receive funding from many bodies, Sport England being one of them as well, to drive diversity initiatives across the game. There's quite a lot that we've initiated. The ICEC, the Independent Commission for Equity in Sport, is something equity in cricket, was conceived in November 2020 and launched in March 2021. Their remit is to explore issues around race, gender and class within cricket at the moment. Cindy Butts, who I'm sure is known to many of the committee, is the chair of the ICEC. So that is one of the initiatives. The Anti-Discrimination Code, which we launched at the beginning of this season, has rolled out across the game, and it means that everyone that sits within the ECB's jurisdiction is now holding to new standards around anti-discrimination. We had elements...
And how are you holding people to account on that as to whether people are actually doing this?
If I can, Alan, if you could pick up around some of the ways that we hold our stakeholders to account. There are many ways. There's our regulatory process.
You're not here in order basically to pass questions around to one another. You answer the question or the chief executive answers the question.
Sure.
So if you're not capable of answering that side of the question, the chief executive can answer.
Yeah. So that stakeholders are held to account through our regulatory process, and that can include fines, bans if you're players or those involved.
And have you done any of those things?
Yes, we have. So very recently we've taken the steps. So as soon as we were aware of the decision and we'd been informed of the decision about Yorkshire on the late October, we had an instantaneous board meeting to decide what sanctions we would bring to bear against Yorkshire, having apologised to Azeem for the extensive racist behaviour he'd been subject to whilst a player at Yorkshire. The subsequent decision not to discipline internally led to us taking immediate steps to sanction Yorkshire County Cricket Club with the full kind of weight of what we have at our disposal, and that is, first of all, we provide funding to all first-class counties. But we also provide matches, and test match and international match allocations is one of the major revenue streams for first-class counties. So we have immediately taken steps to suspend Yorkshire from being a host of international cricket.
But that hasn't come about through your processes, has it?
Yeah, well, it
that
is.
Hasn't come to light through the processes that you've instigated.
So those are processes. We have lots of processes. There is a major match allocation process. There is then
what Ms Miller was talking about, engagement with stakeholders, the other things she mentioned, what has come to light hasn't come through anything you were doing. I accept you've taken action as a result of what's come out.
I think we've taken actions before that as well. Right. I think through the process of... So we were talking a little earlier about the impacts of the Black Lives Matter movement across cricket, and we, as a result of that, did our own exercise within the ECB, which I led personally, to hear the experiences of predominantly black British cricketers through over the course of cricket careers, dating back sometimes to the 90s, and to ask them what. And that led to the instigation and the launch of, in November 2020, we launched that there would be an independent commission for equity in cricket. That subsequently launched in March this year, and we've talked a little bit about that. We have got the independent board, which has been in place since 2018. Since we put that in place, it's a fully independent board overseeing all of cricket in this country, and that is going some way beyond the Sport England Governance Code. We've revised and revamped our anti-discrimination code, which we put into, which now covers all players and administrators through the game of cricket in this country. We've got diversity standards being applied through the game. We've got an all-game meeting later this week, where we will be launching.
Can I just ask you? You've listed a whole things then, but I come back to how do you know these things are being adhered to?
Right.
Because that seems to be where the breakdown here is from what you're doing as an organisation.
And actually, I do feel that the ECB have been aware of the importance of this agenda, not just racism. I think the whole point of discrimination, equity, diversity and inclusion has been if you look at our strategy document, Inspiring Generations, it has EDI at its heart, understanding and acting against discrimination at its heart. What we have struggled with is getting our first-class game to wake up to the same extent. And that is the point. We are at that stage now where I think we are, if not already in an emergency, then we are approaching one. And I think to reflect some of the really interesting comments that Azeem has made this morning, it is very refreshing that even having been through the experiences he's been through, he is willing to help us, to work with us, to be a leader, to help us ensure that these reforms are taken through the game quickly, and it's action, not words, that follows.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. You asked the question as to whether ECB was fit for purpose, and I would strongly assert that it is. But can I just comment on some of the issues you've raised, please, if I may? We do have had a long-standing desire, which started very much from when Tom joined the ECB as Chief Executive, that we wanted to make the game a game for everyone. There's a lot of work involved, and a lot of initiatives have been taken. Part of the process that we have today is to set up what are called county partnership agreements with each of the first-class counties, by which we regularly sit down with them as to whether they are making the appropriate strides towards good governance and good standards throughout their counties. And those are things where we can check on a regular basis how people are doing. Now, I have no doubt, and I can only apologise to Azeem Rafiq and his family for the horrendous time he has gone through, not just when it happened, but subsequently as well. But I want to leave you in no doubt that the game is absolutely filled with the determination to resolve the issue of race in cricket.
Now I would make to that it's all very good apologising, Mr. Rafiq. We've had a lot of apologies to him. What about the thousands of Asian kids, basically, who enter the game and then chucked out the other side, and they do not actually make it, or disproportionately? It's all very good talking about initiatives and EDIs and banding words around, but the point of the matter is there's 85% of kids at Bradford Park Nets of South Asian background, and yet we have 4 British-born Asians representing Yorkshire in the last decade. What on earth is going on? You can't just say, well, the game is doing this, the game is doing that, because clearly you're failing.
Well, I think we have to do better, but I do not believe that the evidence is all bad in that space. I think we have got...
It's actually got worse. The evidence has got worse in terms of participation.
Okay, we accept that there is an awful lot more work to do here, and I also believe that we've got signs in different parts of the country where there are really, really good elements of best practice happening here, and it's not fair to say that that is symptomatic of the entire country. We know that we've got
just in the biggest county with the most championships with the most England players, just the biggest mass participation sporting club, I believe, in the UK. Just that one is the one that's the problem.
No, I'm not saying that. I think that and I'm not refuting any of the evidence, by the way. I'm suggesting that there's a lot more work to do, and that the policies that we have put in place, be that putting in place 1,200 female South Asian activators to help to get young females to play cricket in parts of the country where we previously haven't, urban cricket centres that we're opening up around the country in parts of the environment where we don't
Thank
typically
you. We're going to move on to Clive Efford, then Kevin Browning. Clive Efford.
Thank you, and thank you for coming to give your evidence. You sent round a note to us saying combating racism and making cricket inclusive and accessible, which is very helpful. And you've set up an independent commission under Cindy Butts. That's the first point you make. What are you hoping to learn that we don't already know from that commission?
Well, Do you want to?
Yeah, I'm happy to take it. And we obviously want to know what is going on around the country, and we want evidence.
Why don't you know? For goodness sake, come on.
We will not know everything. We will not know the people who, like Azeem, have perhaps felt unable to disclose what has been happening to them. So we have called, that the Commission has called for evidence, and it's called now, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the output of that Commission is. Now, you cannot simply say, we know what the answer is, and we will go and deal with it. That's part of it, but we must get evidence from around the country. We need to set up the whistleblowing lines that Lord Patel has set up, and get all the feedback we possibly can so that we know that we understand the full extent of the problem.
If I may, Mr. just to follow up on that, we know there is mistrust of administrators and organisations like ours. Tom did a lot of listening work after the Black Lives Matter movement and George Floyd's murder, and we know that people do struggle to come forward. What we did want to do is try and set up an independent body who could hold us to account, report back to us, and share independent findings that we can then share with the game. I think it's clear that we haven't gone far or fast enough. We do want to learn and listen to other people. And to Azeem's earlier point, he requested that we listen. He requested that we did a good, strong listening exercise. And I'm pleased that the ICEC is there and that they can support us in doing that work. I think there is more for us to learn.
Okay, so what your second point in the note you've sent to us, it says you've introduced a game-wide anti-discrimination code. When did you introduce that code?
That was initiated at the start of this season, so we already had some anti-discrimination references within our code, and that hardened it and allowed all those that sit within our jurisdiction to fall under that rule. It allowed us effectively to have more powers and to be able to hold people account, prosecute. And
what inspired you to, felt you, at that moment in time, you needed a new anti-discrimination code, because presumably you weren't, you had one before that, because you would be falling down on your duties if you didn't have one. So why did you need to revise it?
There were elements of anti-discrimination. There wasn't a hard, explicit anti-discrimination code. Previously, you would be charged with bringing the game into disrepute. From what we had heard, it felt necessary for us to be extremely explicit and initiate a fuller, harder anti-discrimination code.
Now, the Fletcher report that I referred to earlier on, which I interpret as an expose of racism in Yorkshire cricket, but others may take a different view, it clearly exposed the lack of opportunity for South Asian cricketers in Yorkshire cricket. What did the ECB do about that?
There's been a huge amount that we've done broadly. So our strategy, Inspiring Generations, we began to create that in 2014. That addresses many inclusion initiatives across the game from all underrepresented groups, not specifically just British South Asian audiences. We have a dedicated South Asian action plan that we're delivering against, and we're seeing positive numbers. We talked earlier on about, I agree with your thoughts around representation in England teams, but we've seen an increase of 7% to 28% of ethnicity in our boys' pathway, so that they are starting to work. We are starting to see data improvements there.
But doesn't the statistics show that you're more likely to represent England if you come from a public school than if you're from an ethnic minority background?
I think the data says that you're more likely to represent England if you go to public school in any sport, but I agree that it is an issue in cricket,
I don't
yes.
think that was held up in football, but never mind. So can I ask you as well, if I went and looked at the data, the Fletcher report was 2014, quite a detailed report. The previous chair wasn't aware of the Fletcher report, which was surprising. If I was to go and look at the statistics from 2014 to now, what difference would I find?
You would see, if I may, you would see huge work across our coaching base and improvement of underrepresented groups.
You've said that, but where is the representation at senior level? Where is it? This is why we're here.
Yeah.
Because we are getting lots of participation. Azeem said it himself. We're getting lots of participation at grassroots level. Lots of young people are playing cricket from the South Asian community. The issue we're here confronting is that they're not getting through to the elite at the higher levels of cricket in Yorkshire, as we're looking at today. But is that, from what we've heard, if we looked anywhere across the cricketing hierarchy, we would see the same in other counties. So why haven't we seen that change?
Well, I think we're drilling into some of the real issues that have been brought around through Azeem's testimony and the work that's been done through the report, and indeed will follow through the ECB investigation, which is happening now. But I think ultimately we need to start to look at dressing room culture through the country, and indeed the culture around the professional game specifically, and how we are looking at our pathways. As I said, we do have some positive evidence around some of the boys' pathway data that is following the imposition of both male and female talent managers at ECB, which we didn't previously have, which we now do. As I said, there is a huge focus on this, Mr. Efford, from the ECB. It does take time to trickle through the network, and I believe this is where we need help to enable our network to reflect the accountability the ECB has and feels in this space, with the control to impose it.
My last question is, because others want to come in, and this is this term Kevin, the racist use of the name Kevin. And it has been alleged that is widespread and not just used in Yorkshire, but has at the elite level has been in common use. Has the ECB been made aware of the use of Kevin as a racist term at senior level, or any other racist incidents that have been reported to it that haven't been acted on?
Well, the first time I became of the slur was in the reading report. So it will now form part of the ECB investigation, and of course it will be dealt with in the same way that all allegations are being dealt with through that investigation. But I had not heard of that statement before I read the report.
What do you do if you find that England players are using this phrase?
Well,
no, you're the chief executive.
Well, we have but this is really important that we have a regulatory process which has with it a report which will go to the Cricket Discipline Commission.
You were fairly quick to ban Ollie Robinson.
Well, we were, and that's because we had to...
So someone, for example, using this particular phraseology because they don't wish to pronounce the proper names of individuals, and then, for example, jokingly has a black dog that they name after this, well, what should happen to them? Are they someone basically you want in the England team?
No, of course not, Mr. Knight. And I would say this, that the difference between the allegation that you're alleging and the Ollie Robinson situation is one of them was wearing an England shirt at the time.
Yeah, he was also 14 or 15 years old when he made the particular comments, and this person is not.
18.
18,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
But Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Chair. The Cindy Butt Independent Commission on Equity in Cricket, will the ECB commit to introduce its findings when it reports?
In our CBI action plan, we have committed to listening, understanding and implementing recommendations that are made.
So you are committed to implement
Correct,
the recommendations that come out of that report. Thank you. Mr. Hutton earlier on, I asked him, has the ECB done enough to combat racism? He said no. And then he went on to talk about the fact that he wished that the ECB had conducted the report into Yorkshire Cricket Club. Was he wrong to say you haven't done enough on racism?
Well, until you've eradicated racism from the sport, I don't think anyone can say you've done enough. It's a scourge on sport, let alone cricket. It's a scourge on society, and we are taking the steps that we've set out today, whether that is around governance reform, whether it's about introducing the ICEC, whether it's about launching the anti-discrimination code, whether it's sanctions against Yorkshire, or whether it's about now launching the EDI plan.
So your answer basically, you can never do enough to combat racism.
I agree, yes, I think that is
so
my answer.
Can I just go back to the report itself and the process that was conducted at Yorkshire Cricket Club and the ECB's involved in that? Just to check, were you aware of what was going on around the change in the way that the terms of reference of that report was changed halfway through, so that the panel, was going to take it upon itself to report on institutional racism and not allow those investigators to make a determination on that? Were you aware of that?
I was not aware, no.
Would it be fair to say that effectively what you did here is you sanctioned a process by which Yorkshire Cricket Club were going to produce a report, which you were then going to overlook as the regulator. That's really what you
not overlook, take judgment on.
Take judgment on as a regulator. And yet this was a process which Yorkshire Cricket Club were able to, and did in fact, for a long period of time, possibly until this committee intervened, withhold that report from your site. How do you sanction a process where someone's going to produce a report which you are then going to pass judgment on, when it's a process that allows them to actually withhold the report from your site?
As I think we've said before, we've learned lessons from this. I don't think there was anything wrong in allowing Yorkshire to do their report. It wasn't right for us to intervene in order that we could regulate.
But Mr Dickinson, you didn't say to them at the time, if you're going to do this, if you're going to do the report, you must show it to us. So we can do our job as a regulator.
The report to be completed within 3 months, and we expected you to have sight of it thereafter. Clearly today, our process would not be to just let them do a report. We would do a report ourselves, an investigation ourselves as well.
You were sold a pup, basically, weren't you?
We trusted Yorkshire and we were let down.
Right. So that Yorkshire Cricket Club, not only have we found out today from their former chair, is institutionally racist, but it's also an untrustworthy organisation whose word can't be trusted. Is that what you're telling us?
I think the handling of the report, the handling of it, indicates there are some certain issues around institutional racism at Yorkshire. The handling of the report, I would agree with that.
What the content? Content, surely.
I think the content talks to culture and the culture of the game, which is, needs to be thoroughly dealt with across more dressing rooms than just the Yorkshire County Cricket Club, as we've heard through testimony this afternoon.
Just to be clear, when Mr Hutton said earlier on, when he assented to the proposition that Yorkshire is an institutionally racist organisation, are you agreeing with that or not agreeing with that?
I'm saying that the handling of the
I heard you say that just now, but I'm not asking. I'm asking you whether you agree with what Mr Hutton said, when he agreed that he felt that Yorkshire was cricket. I think I asked him, is Yorkshire County Cricket Club institutionally racist, and he ultimately said yes. Do you agree with that?
I agree that the handling of the report indicates issues around institutional racism. That's as far as I'm prepared to go.
You're obviously not going to answer my question as to whether you agree with what Mr Hutton said. You either agree with him or you don't agree with him. And I understand what you said about the culture of it. You don't agree with him, do you? That's what you're saying.
As I said, I think the handling of the report speaks to institutional racism.
I think any reasonable person would determine for that exchange that you don't fully agree with Mr Hutton. And would I be wrong to draw that conclusion?
I think I've made my position.
Okay. Yeah, just finally, Chair, because I don't want to go on forever, but Essex started an investigation now, is that correct?
That's
into the accusations. So do you abandon yours now or suspend yours in the meantime while they do theirs? And have you got a commitment from them that they'll actually show it to you when they finish their report?
We won't abandon ours. We welcome them also taking responsibility for looking into the matter because they have responsibilities as an employer.
So there's going to be two competing reports produced?
Not competing. They are looking into it as an employer. It's a different role that they play, but we will carry out our role as regulator regardless of their investigation as an employer.
I see. So there is an obvious question. What if their conclusions disagree with your conclusions?
So that won't. So we will have two. There'll be two roles we will play. Well, there's two things we will be looking into: the allegations that have been made, and we will come to a judgment on that. But we also will look at the way they handle matters, and if they mishandle matters, that will be subject to a separate disciplinary process. So if they come to a different conclusion in a way that shows mishandling. So it's less about the conclusion and more about the way they handle the matter. So if they mishandle this matter, they will also be subject to a regulatory process, not just in relation to the allegations, but the way they dealt with them.
Okay, well, we can unpack that later. I think the Chair has to pull stumps soon, so I'll pass it.
Very well, no, we've got Alex Davis-Jones coming in as last man.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief because I know we are short on time. Mr Harrison, do you see this as a watershed moment for the sport?
Absolutely, I do.
Then how do we make real change here and stop these initiatives that Mr Rafiq mentioned, such as the South Asian Action Plan, the Inspiring a Generation report, the plans to tackle misogyny, homophobia, racism? How do we stop this being tokenistic?
Well, I think it comes down to results and accountability, doesn't it? And Azeem also spoke of that. I think the ECB would welcome the accountability to achieve the results that this committee and others expect us to do. We want to lead this, and there are times when we need to, through consultation and debate, consult with our game and then come back with answers. And there are times where, frankly, the ECB needs to lead and be able to have a degree of control. And that won't be a popular comment in the first-class network, but I believe in this case it is absolutely fundamental to our ability to remain relevant as a sport to our changing environment and to send a clear message about, first of all, is cricket a game for everyone? Are we serious when we make strategic comments about that we fully believe in, about driving policy towards accessibility, towards openness, transparency, and all of the work that we have done through Inspiring Generations, which, although it's been maligned at certain points, it is an excellent strategic visionary document that sets out what cricket should look like for communities in this country.
But it hasn't worked, has it? Because
well, we're in year 2 of 5, and all I'd say is that it is the right plan. It just clearly needs, and look, and again, I've heard the hope come through this committee today. I've heard it in every witness statement that we've heard this afternoon. I've heard an element of hope that we can use this to bring community leaders to help us, to bring people from different communities that have felt maligned, that have felt they can't speak, that have felt there's a lack of trust with the cricket authorities in this country. I think all of the measures that we've talked about today, such as, I know we keep going back to it, but the Commission for Equity in Cricket gives people an external venting opportunity. The hotlines that are going to be set up across the country. Well, these are all opportunities for us to bring the game together and move forward.
You mentioned the hotlines, and in your own words, you've anticipated an explosion of complaints following the whistleblowing of Mr. Rafiq. Are you resourced enough? What actual resource and funding are you giving to this to make sure that you can cope with the explosion of complaints?
Right.
And how are these going to be dealt with?
Well, I think you can take it from me that this will be a properly resourced and properly funded element of our business.
Okay, whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes.
Okay.
And what we heard this morning from Azeem Rafiq was that he wants this game to get better on the issue of racism. Rest assured, ECB absolutely shares that. We have a meeting on Friday with the whole game, and I personally am very sure that the whole game will want to come together to see action to get to where we need to be.
Okay. And finally, because I know we are short on time, but watching this today has been incredibly harrowing, being in the room, but I know there's thousands of people across the UK who've been watching this who love the game and want to support the game, but are being extremely disappointed by cricket and the game as it currently is. What do you say to that? And what do you say to people whose impression of cricket now is on the floor?
I say, please understand that we're really sorry for what the experiences that you may have been through trying to engage in cricket in this country. We know we've let you down, and we are going to fix this, and we're going to fix it quickly, and we're going to fix it fast, because the survival of our sport depends on it. And it's absolutely at the core of the ECB, and we will work endlessly to ensure that very quickly that message is received throughout our network, and we will transform this game very quickly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Finally. Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to come in because it's something I was going to ask earlier, but I thought I was running out of time. And it's on the sanction that you've taken out against Yorkshire Cricket and taken away the Test match. I wonder what sanction you've got open to you now, if you're in the light of your investigations. Now that you've done that, but is it the intention of the ECB to use the major cricketing events as leverage to make sure that county cricket clubs adhere to your anti-discrimination code and adopt whatever recommendations come out of your Commission's report?
Categorically, yes. Absolutely, we will. It's and just to explain your earlier point about what other opportunities we have to impose sanctions through the disciplinary and regulatory process. Mina, do you just want to cover that off quickly?
We do. So, as we've covered, we've got the regulatory role, and that is what we're doing with the investigation, and the sanctions for that will be delivered by an independent cricket discipline commission. But as well as that, as Mr. Harrison has set out, we're also the promoter, and there are sanctions that we can bring to bear through that. So the major matches that you have referred to, also funding through our county partnership agreement. So there are different ways in which ECB can bring sanctions to bear on the counties in relation to this area.
Thank you. Mr. Harrison, one final one from me. Colin Graves, the Graves Trust, and its relationship with Yorkshire. Many people outside the game don't quite understand exactly the way in which that they had Yorkshire at the palm of the hand, because basically they got the debt. And the trustees and their role in this debacle, and the fact that they, according to Mr. Hutton, they were a roadblock to reform of the board and changes at Yorkshire. What are you going to do about that trust and its relationship with Yorkshire? Because that appears to me to be desperately unhealthy for the game.
So one of the sanctions that we were asked to commission, that we handed down to Yorkshire a couple of weeks ago, was that the ECB's executive had been asked by the board, by the ECB board, to commission a governance review of Yorkshire County Cricket Club. So I think all of that will get caught up in that governance review, which we will make available to this committee.
And do you recognise that it's a potentially a major problem?
I do.
Yeah. Thank you. That concludes our session today. Thank you very much for your evidence. Order, order.
House.